Chapter 380. The little fox raised its head and a strange glow appeared in its clear eyes. It seemed like it was very interested in the flower fairies because the little fox could feel that the flower fairies' little bodies contained a very strong energy. Ayaya, he really never thought of it. This damn place actually had flower fairies. Chu Tian was very surprised by this, just like a treasure hunter finding an unexpected treasure. The flower fairies had several kinds of innate talents and they themselves were very rare treasures, so they were captured in large amounts by humans in the future and were finally on the verge of extinction. Chu Tian never thought that there would be such a mysterious race in the forest of chaos. The flower fairies had many abilities. The first was healing. The flower fairies' little bodies contained a very strong innate life energy and they could extract life essence from the earth and plants, using it to heal any animal. If one could tame a flower fairy, it would be equivalent to having several more lives, so just this ability alone was enough to attract people's greed. The second was farming. The flower fairies were natural gardeners, so no matter how hard it was to grow, if the flower fairies took care of it, they would be able to grow it well. Moreover, the flower fairies could increase the growth rate by 10 times. Herbs that took 10 years to mature could be grown in a year. The third was treasure hunting. The flower fairies could communicate with the trees, flowers, and the earth. If there was a treasure hidden in the forest, the flower fairies could easily find it, so they were loved by adventurers. These 3 abilities were confirmed. As for the other abilities of the flower fairies, Chu Tian had heard a few before. For example, the flower fairies themselves were top-quality supplementary materials and there were many evil alchemists that could directly refine flowers into pills, directly increasing the quality of pills. For example, when refining a half-immortal grade pill, if a flower fairy was added, the pill refined could directly increase its quality to immortal grade. There was no proof for this, but there was a lot of evidence behind it. Because the flower fairies were an innate life form and were bred from the forest's life essence, the flower fairies did not have males and each flower fairy appeared as a female. They were a very rare innate treasure, but because they did not have the ability to reproduce, there were very few flower fairies. Chu Tian looked over the little flower fairy and decided to establish a good relationship with the flower fairies. Flower fairy, what is your name? Aya, you can actually recognize me? I thought that apart from the elves, no other race on the continent knew of our existence. The little flower fairy revealed a pleasantly surprised expression. She immediately shook her transparent wings and circled around Chu Tian. I'm called Lulu. The flower fairy left a trail of crystal clear light in the air, which made the little fox scratch a few times. It used its nose to suck the light powder into its body and its face was filled with an intoxicated look. Lulu was also one of Chu Tian's admirers. The video disc player that Aubersen gave Vivian had been borrowed by the flower fairies for a long time. The flower fairies were a rare race with weak reproductive abilities, so they had a small population. However, in the Tree of Life tribe, they had a very high status. Lulu asked innocently, "Can you really pluck the stars from the sky? What's so difficult about it?" As long as I build an aircraft that can fly to outer space, then I can open up the outer space mines. Chu Tian patted his chest and said, "This is a piece of cake for me." Lulu revealed a look of shock and worship. "Can you really do anything?" Of course there were many things in this world that he couldn't do. So to the pure little flower fairy, Chu Tian couldn't boast. He just asked in a curious voice, "What, you don't believe me? My skills are very great. Do you want to give it a try?" Lulu fell into Chu Tian's palm and looked at him with a surprised expression. "How do I try?" Chu Tian looked at the flower fairy in his palm without any vigilance and said, "I can guess the biggest worry of your flower fairy's race." "Is that so? Why don't you tell me? Has the flower fairies always been worried about how to make the Tree of Life seed germinate?" Lulu's eyes suddenly popped open. "You? How did you know? Did the wood elves tell you?" "How could the wood elves tell me this kind of thing?" "Of course not." Chu Tian revealed a profound smile and said, "I also know that the flower fairies have a special ability. You can cultivate any kind of rare plant, but you can't cultivate the Tree of Life seed, am I right?" Lulu nodded like a chicken pecking at rice. The flower fairies have found the tree of life seed, but they have been researching it for many generations and have not made any progress. Everyone says that the seed has already died and there is no chance of it germinating. Saying this, Lulu revealed a sad expression, but she immediately said in a worshipful voice, "Are you a prophet? How do you know the secret of the flower fairies?" Chu Tian of course was not a prophet. But in the history of the flower fairies, they had successfully cultivated the tree of life sapling. It was because of the tree of life sapling that caused a large stir and brought a large disaster, causing the flower fairies to be hunted down, and the tree of life sapling was stolen by the humans. It was a pity that the humans did not have the ability to cultivate the tree of life, so this top-grade god-grade material withered in the end. This matter had a very deep influence in history and was the fuse for the war between the humans and elves. Of course the humans won in the end. However, later generations of scholars thought that this matter was a large stain on human history, directly destroying the friendship between the humans and elves. Since they met, this kind of regret could not be allowed to repeat itself. Chu Tian said to Lulu, "I have a method to help the flower fairies awaken the tree of life seed." Really? Lulu's voice instantly increased by several times. "What method is that? Quickly tell Lulu." Chu Tian slowly said, "The tree of life seed did not die, it is only in a deep sleep. This is because after the great ancient era, there was no suitable soil for the tree of life to grow. So no matter how much effort the flower fairies put into cultivating it, they would return without any results in the end. Actually, it is not hard to awaken the tree of life seed. As long as we collect the great ancient aura that has not dissipated from the space and use a special method to pour this aura into the seed, we can awaken the seed." Lulu was confused hearing this. How do we do this? This involves very high-level technology, especially spatial technology. I am very willing to help the flower fairies, but it's a pity that the current me is unable to help. Chu Tian gave a sigh and said, "The tree of life is a divine object, not being able to see it germinate is my regret." Lulu thought about it for a few seconds before flying up. "You don't need to worry, I will think of a way. I definitely won't let the wood elves kill you. I promise." After saying this, the little flower fairy charged out the window and instantly disappeared. The little fox rolled its eyes. Its master really knew how to trick little girls, but thinking of the smell of the flower fairies, it couldn't help licking it. If it could eat a few flower fairies, it would definitely be able to evolve. "Don't mess around." Chu Tian knocked the fox's head. "The flower fairies have a deep relationship with the elves. Do you want to become enemies with the elves?" The little fox gave a snort and spat out a mouthful of saliva in disdain. If it didn't want to eat, then it didn't. What was the big deal? Actually, compared to the little flower fairies, the fox was more interested in the tree of life. Although it knew that its master liked to trick people, his abilities weren't bad. Since he had made a solemn promise, perhaps he really could cultivate a tree of life. After a few days, Aeldis brought Chu Tian out. The elven court had already been set up. Chu Tian was going to be judged by the elves as a suspect. The ancient Tree of Life tribe had not opened the elven court in 300 years. Because of Princess Vivian's relationship this time, it had attracted the attention of the tribe. When Chu Tian arrived at the elven court, he was stunned for a while. The elven court was in a strange forest and there were several dozen giant trees scattered around it. Each tree was as thick as 20 people wrapping their arms around it, and they were like tall houses rising from the ground. There were many natural structures on the tree trunks that were filled with elves, and there were many elves standing on the branches. This tedious and complicated ceremony lasted for 2 hours before Chu Tian and Vivian were brought out. The surrounding elves were all discussing. It was the first time most of them had seen a human. When those young elven children saw Chu Tian appear, they were all very excited, but they were also very worried. On the tallest tree in the center, an elven old man stood up, and beside him were several elders of the Tree of Life tribe. This should be the main judge of this trial. I am the Elven Council's Vice Speaker Ulysses. This old elf gave a simple introduction. Under the witness of the forest and life god, we will now begin the elven court's trial. Chu Tian was a bit impatient. We'll first ask the victim, the Tree of Life's third elder Obersen, to come out. The elven elder Obersen came out. He saw the little princess staring at him and his heart couldn't help feeling a bit apprehensive. However, she was still a victim and the little princess was too arrogant. If he didn't teach her a lesson this time, she would definitely cause trouble in the future. Chu Tian was already very impatient. The elves had too long of a lifespan, doing everything slowly. When could they be more efficient? At this time, several thumping sounds came from all around them. The elves all looked over in surprise and saw incomparably tall Traians slowly walking over. Ulysses asked in a surprised voice, "Why has the noble Traians suddenly come?" The Traians normally did not move and most of the time they were motionless. Who would have thought that they would come today? Just as everyone was astonished, the leader of the Traians said bluntly, "This human is a guest of the Traiant tribe. We do not wish to be accused of any crimes." When these words were said, the entire elven race was stunned. The elves had prepared for many days, doing their homework and collecting evidence. When they were finally about to have a fair and just trial, a group of Traians suddenly appeared, making everyone feel shocked. "That's right, I'm here to supervise the trial. If Chu Tian is not guilty, don't think of making it hard for him." Several flower fairies flew out from the Traians. "He is also a guest of us flower fairies." Chapter 381. This was definitely Lulu's help. The flower fairies had a very close relationship with the Traians, so if Lulu told the Traians about Chu Tian's matter, the Traians would not sit idly by. Since there was someone supporting him, he had less to worry about. Chu Tian wanted to retreat completely, but it seemed like he couldn't just retreat completely. He had to at least obtain a bit more benefits. The elven trial began. An elf loudly said, "Vivian secretly left the tribe and went to a human kingdom, not returning for an entire 2 months. We even have evidence that Vivian participated in the human and spirit beast wars and killed a spirit beast kingdom's king. This is a serious violation of the ancestors' teachings and the evidence is conclusive. She will be imprisoned for at least 50 years. He paused before saying, "Vivian stole the tribe elder Obersen's immortal herb and gave it to the human Chu Tian. She even joined Chu Tian's organization, degrading herself and working for the humans, damaging the elven race's image. Then he led the humans back to the Forest of Chaos to fight with the spirit insects, killing several descendants of the Spider Queen Alexis, worsening the relationship between the elves and the spirit insects. This is very detrimental to the elven diplomacy, so he should be locked up for at least 100 years. Finally he came to a conclusion. Vivian is the Elven King's youngest daughter, but she did not set an example, instead corrupting the elven culture. She has a very bad influence, so I recommend that she be heavily punished. She will be permanently stripped of her princess status and be imprisoned for 200 years. 200 years. The elves all sucked in a cold breath. Vivian, these accusations. Ulysses asked in a low voice, "What do you want to say?" Even for the elves, 200 years was half a lifetime. There were very few elves that received this kind of heavy punishment. Vivian's face was a bit pale, but she clenched her teeth and gave a snort, looking like she didn't care at all. Although Vivian has violated the tribe's rules, something rarely seen in the past 100 years. But for Princess Vivian to do this kind of thing, the human Chu Tian cannot escape his responsibility. Now it was time to settle accounts with Chu Tian. Vivian stole the immortal herb and gave it to Chu Tian. The person who invited Vivian to join the human company was also Chu Tian. Vivian being involved in the war between the humans and the spirit beasts as well as the spirit insects was all because of Chu Tian. Human abductions and robberies of elves have happened all over the continent. Raping, humiliating, and even forcing elves to engage in the filthy trade of flesh is not uncommon. This was something that all elves abhorred, and Chu Tian's method of using Vivian was exactly the same, so he had to be severely punished. I suggest the death penalty. The elves discussed with each other for a few minutes before they all nodded. If Vivian's sentence was heavier, then there was no objection to Chu Tian's sentence. This damned human was truly despicable. To actually use the pure and kind elf clan, this was simply unforgivable. These old elves had seen too many evil deeds. It was common for elves to be captured by human traffickers in the forest, and after these human traffickers caught elves, most of them would be sold to human countries. In the eyes of the elves, humans were a dirty race without a bottom line. Although the elves did not have any grudges against the humans, they did not like the human race at all. In their eyes, the humans that came into contact with the elves all had dirty intentions, so their motives towards Vivian were not pure. Letting the elves suffer this kind of storm, even if they were killed several times, it would be hard to recover from the negative effects. Ulysses said to Chu Tian, "Human, the elves are a just race, I'll give you a chance to defend yourself." "Defend my ass." The elves' faces fell. Chu Tian broke out in laughter. "I've long heard of the elves' stupidity, I've finally seen it today. No wonder the elves are declining on the continent. Not to mention comparing to humans, you spirit beasts can't even compare to them. Otherwise, how could you do such a stupid thing? Destroying your own city walls while feeling superior." The elves were instantly angered. What kind of noble and proud race was this? Being compared to spirit beasts, this was no longer an insult, this was a naked provocation. Ulysses had no expression on his face as he lightly said, "You arrogantly insulted the noble elves, adding another crime to your crime does not help, it can only add another crime to it. I advise you to be careful with your words, you don't have many chances left." Noble, righteous, elegant, kind, the elves always like to label themselves. Chu Tian was not servile as he fearlessly said, "What I see is a group of short-sighted pedantic people who do not think of progress, comfortable with their current situation, only immersed in their long history, not daring to face the future, cowards. The most laughable thing is that these cowards want to make these damn rules to restrict and persecute the true pioneers of the race, persecuting the true heroes of the race, like Princess Vivian." Everyone was dumbfounded. Even Vivian herself was stunned. When did she become the elves' hero? Was she the pioneer of the elves' reform? Did this have anything to do with money? Ulysses stood up, "Nonsense. Since you've given up the chance to defend yourself, don't blame the elves for not giving you a chance. Someone." "Sir Vice Speaker." Chu Tian's words were sharp as he pointed at Ulysses, "I only want to ask you one question. Looking at your appearance, you should be over 600 years old, but you've lived for so many years, what have you done for the elves? What changes have you made to the elves with your high position?" Ulysses was a bit speechless as he said with a slight frown, "My race pursues freedom and rule by doing nothing, how could you vain humans understand that? The spirit beasts have almost crippled the elves and you still want to rule by doing nothing? Since you want to rule by doing nothing, then what is the Elven Council for? You should just disband it." Chu Tian's words became sharper and sharper, "Immersed in your race's past glory and immersed in your sense of superiority, the ones who are truly vain are you elves. Not abdicating your position, harming others and yourself, do you really need to exterminate your race to wake up?" Ulysses was finally angered. Even if the elves had good tempers, they still couldn't take Chu Tian's repeated insults. "All right, then I want to ask you, what does Vivian's actions mean to the elves?" Chu Tian passionately said to Vivian, "Princess Vivian was moved by the elves and decided to find a way to save the elves. Finally, through Miracle Commerce's products, she learned of our new era's technology. In order to bring new technology to the elves, Vivian did not hesitate to steal an immortal herb and traveled tens of thousands of kilometers to save me." He told the whole story with embellished details. "I am a southern summer human, I did not know anything about the elven forest and did not know Princess Vivian. I was moved by Vivian's sincerity, so I took in Princess Vivian and taught her a high-level cultivation technique, as well as the world's best technology. Vivian knew the strict rules of the elves, so she hid in southern summer. She wanted to learn a peerless cultivation technique and master the best technology before coming back to lead the elves in a revolution. Who would have thought that our hearts were filled with sincerity? How could we be as dirty as you think? The elves were all speechless. Without waiting for the elves to speak, Chu Tian righteously asked, "Please use your brain that hasn't been used for several hundred years to think about it. The southern summer country is only a small country, how can I attract Princess Vivian? I am only in the awakened soul realm and we are tens of thousands of kilometers apart. I can't even pass through the forest of chaos with my strength, so how could I trick the elves in the forest?" Ulysses knit his brows. "Then how did Vivian know of your existence?" Vivian was in the fourth true spirit layer and could be considered an expert even in the forest of chaos. How could someone with this kind of strength be tricked by an awakened soul realm cultivator? This was a completely unreasonable matter. Chu Tian coldly said, "Then you'll have to ask an elven elder." At this time, some elves around them called out. It was Elder Aubersen who brought the video disc player back to the tribe. We all met Chu Tian from the video disc player. Aubersen revealed an awkward expression. The reason why Vivian knew Chu Tian was because of him. Ulysses asked Aubersen, "What is going on with this matter?" Reporting to the vice speaker, "When I was passing through southern Xia, I found something different from southern Xia, so I brought it back as a gift for the princess. I never thought that it would develop like this." Ulysses then asked, "Vivian, what did you do in the 2 months you were with the humans?" Vivian looked at Chu Tian with a questioning gaze. Chu Tian nodded at her and she boldly said, "I have been secretly cultivating the top spatial cultivation technique Chu Tian taught me, void escaping. I have also been learning the space warehouse." Spatial cultivation technique? The elves were all shocked. Vivian never had a suitable cultivation technique for herself, this was something everyone knew. Could it be that she had already grasped a spatial cultivation technique? This was simply impossible. How rare was a spatial cultivation technique, how could a human take it out? Ulysses then asked, "What is this space warehouse?" "Before I was captured, I was a spatial engineer for Miracle Commerce." Vivian proudly stuck out her chest. "I had already developed a space warehouse and wanted to complete a second one. Then I asked Chu Tian for permission to bring this space warehouse back for my clansmen to use. In the end, before the second space warehouse was completed, I was captured by you all." Vivian carefully explained the characteristics of the space warehouse to the elves. The elves all sucked in a breath of cold air when they heard this. Aeldis and Aubersen all stared with wide eyes. How could there be this kind of magical technology in this world? Could it be that the humans had already progressed to this level? If it really was like this, the elves should really reflect on themselves. They clearly had tens of thousands of years of history, but they had been thrown this far by the humans. "I've decided to take back the space warehouse. From now on, I won't share any technology with the elves." Chu Tian directly said, "As for the cultivation technique I'll give to the princess, I'll treat it as repayment for the medicine. If you want to kill me now, then do as you wish. I believe that after I die 100 years, the humans will take revenge for me and flatten the elves of the forest of chaos. And the elves will forever be marked as a disgrace in history because of their ingratitude, filthy, and narrow-mindedness." Vivian's body trembled. How could she know that Chu Tian was purposely provoking the elves? "You've ruined everything, it's all ruined by you." She didn't have any reaction even when the elves announced that she would be locked up for 200 years, but now she began to cry. She angrily shouted, I'm ashamed to be associated with you all. Just lock me up for 1,000 years, I don't want to see you all anymore." Chapter 382. When the miracle commerce technology spread across the continent, Chu Tian would become a great sage in the history of the human race. Then what Chu Tian said would most likely happen. If they killed Chu Tian now, the elves would be cursed by the entire race and it would become an excuse for the humans to attack the elves in the future. This matter could happen in 100 years, and 100 years to the elves was not a long time. Aeldis thought of what Chu Tian said 2 days ago. She thought this human was just spouting nonsense, but now it seemed like it was possible. Did the elves really want to take this kind of risk to kill Chu Tian? The Tree of Life tribe's third elder Obersen had been to southern Xia before, and he had seen all kinds of magical products in southern Xia. When he heard Chu Tian's words, his heart couldn't help turning cold. Sir Vice Speaker, I suggest we stop here. As for the nature of this case, we should discuss it and collect evidence before making a decision. All right. Ulysses couldn't make a decision for a moment. We'll stop here for today. Chu Tian was not locked up by the elves, rather he was taken away by the Tree-ant and flower fairies. Vivian saw Chu Tian sitting on the Tree-ant and being escorted away by a group of flower fairies, making her feel incomparably defeated. She hadn't been in miracle commerce for a long time, but this was the first thing she loved from the bottom of her heart. If she lost it because of the elves, it would be an unprecedented blow to Vivian. Princess Vivian. Aildis walked in front of Vivian. The vice speaker wants you to go over and explain everything clearly. Vivian angrily shouted, what is there to explain? The elves looked at each other in blank dismay. The Trent's size was related to their strength and age. In normal situations, the larger they were, the longer they lived and the stronger they were. When Chu Tian was brought to the Tree-ant tribe, he immediately saw 100-meter-tall Tree-ants standing in front of him. It was like a towering mountain that he couldn't see the top of. Its branches were covered in dense leaves. Each leaf was bright like jade and emitted an incomparably vigorous life force. The Trent's legs were deeply rooted in the soil, as if it hadn't moved an inch for hundreds of years. Its wrinkled face was filled with the vicissitudes of time. The guardian of the forest, the leader of the Tree-ants, Cenarius. This was an old Tree-ant that had lived for over 10,000 years. With a casual slap, even a true spirit expert would be turned into meat paste. Not to mention the Tree-ants were not a race that relied on brute force. It was hard to imagine the power accumulated in a 10,000-year-old Tree-ant. Cenarius possessed unimaginable wisdom, and even the Elven King had to show him respect. You're so brave. Lulu brought a group of flower fairies to circle around Chu Tian. In today's situation, you actually dared to impolitely teach the elves a lesson. It really broadened my horizons. But in recent years, the elves have been in a bad situation, so I hope you'll wake up. Chu Tian shrugged his shoulders. Wake up my ass. If they could be changed that easily, would they still be elves? The elves were naturally like this, it wouldn't have any use. Chu Tian walked in front of Cenarius and gave him a very polite bow. He said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, respected guardian of the forest Cenarius, what orders do you have for this one? Cenarius was one of the legends of the forest. No matter who it was, they would be very nervous when they saw Cenarius, but Chu Tian did not show any discomfort at all. Rather his expression was calm and his words were appropriate, just like he was talking to an old friend. This made Lulu feel very impressed. Young human. A deep and wise old voice seemed to come from the earth, your words about the elves are too extreme. The elves are not a race that likes to fight, so I'm afraid they cannot accept your point of view. Cenarius was a powerful Tree-ant. As long as he wanted to, he could hear all sounds within several thousand miles, so he knew everything that happened in the elven court. Chu Tian calmly said, the continent has been in turmoil since ancient times, but what is the reason? Is it a struggle for resources or land? No. All living beings in this world are born greedy, so they fight. They are born selfish, so they become thieves. They are born with ears and eyes, so they are infatuated with pleasures. They are born cruel, so they are destined to kill and kill. In such an environment, how could the elven clan be pure and clean? When the elves truly wake up, it will already be too late. Although my words are sharp, they are painstaking for the elves. Cenarius didn't comment on Chu Tian's words, your experience and wisdom are completely inconsistent with your age. It seems like you are hiding a secret that no one knows about. Could it be that this old thing saw something? This was an old thing that had lived for over 10,000 years. Although Chu Tian thought highly of himself, in front of this kind of wisdom, he didn't dare be careless. But the Tree-ants have never interfered with the elves. Cenarius seemed like he wasn't interested in this matter at all. Today I've invited the Treants as guests. I won't talk about the elves or right or wrong, I just want to talk about the matter of the Tree of Life seed. I've heard from the flower fairies that you have a way to awaken the seed. How confident are you? Chu Tian thought about it and said, the Tree of Life seed is an innate divine object, it won't die easily. However, wanting to awaken it is not an easy matter. Although I have a certain amount of confidence, I am not 100% sure. I have to give it a try first. The Tree of Life was very important to the flower fairies, Treants, and elves. If they could revive the Tree of Life, the survival of the three races would greatly increase. Chu Tian was a human in the end, should they believe him or not? Cenarius did not directly state his position, the Tree of Life has never been seen by an outsider, so how do you know the characteristics of the Tree of Life? I've obtained a fragment of an ancient god's memory by chance. There are many things about the great ancient era recorded inside, as well as some secrets and records about the Tree of Life. From this crystal, I naturally understand the characteristics of the Tree of Life. Combined with my research in the spatial domain, I believe this is a very effective method. An ancient god's memory crystal. The Treants were very shocked. The spiritual gods had been dead for countless years. For this human to obtain a memory crystal of a spiritual god, this was truly a great opportunity. Chu Tian was very interested in the Treants because they were a strong ally. If he could obtain the Trent's support, miracle commerce would be able to move freely in the forest. So Chu Tian had already prepared all kinds of excuses and tricks. He wanted to trick the Treants bit by bit, even if this was not an easy matter. After all, the Trent's 10,000 years of wisdom was not just for show. Miracle commerce, the flower fairies, and the Treants, if the three of us work together, it is completely possible for us to replant the ancient Tree of Life. The flower fairies Lulu and the others immediately nodded. They were at their wits' end. If they had Chu Tian help, this might not be a bad idea. The ancient Tree of Life had an inconceivable creative power. If they could replant the Tree of Life, it would definitely have a large impact. This would fulfill the dream of the Treants, flower fairies, and elves for tens of thousands of years. Chu Tian believed that this was a cooperation that he could not refuse. As long as the Treants nodded, miracle commerce would have a chance to rely on this mountain. As for the elves, you don't care about me, I don't care about you. This matter, I have to think about it. Who would have thought that Cenarius would suddenly not say anything? Lulu, take the guest for a walk nearby. Chu Tian slightly knit his brows. This old Treant did not play his cards according to common sense, so Chu Tian could not do anything about it. Cenarius did not want to say anything, but Chu Tian could not force him. He could only say, then I'll say my goodbyes. Lulu circled around Chu Tian in a very lively manner. Chu Tian, the Treant forest is not fun at all. I'll bring you to the flower fairies' garden to have a look, there will definitely be something you like there. The flower fairies have never had guests before, so everyone will definitely welcome you. Chu Tian's heart slightly skipped a beat. The flower fairies were famous for their divine planting skills. This flower fairies' garden was definitely a treasure trove that normal people would not have a chance to touch. If Chu Tian had this chance, how could he give it up? The depression from not being able to sway the Treants was swept away. All right. Chu Tian said with a nod, then let's go to the flower fairies' garden to have a look. Lulu revealed a smile and quickly circled around twice. She immediately flapped her wings to lead the way. The elven tribe, the Treant forest, and the flower fairies' garden, these three places formed a triangle, but there was a relatively large empty space in the center. Chu Tian asked in a curious voice, why is there an uninhabited forest between the three races? Lulu slowed down and stuck close to Chu Tian's side as she said, you must be talking about the Lost Forest. No one is allowed to enter that place because although the Lost Forest is not big, there are often illusions in the forest. Once any animal is trapped in an illusion, they will be completely lost and will never be able to come out. There's actually this kind of thing. Chu Tian was suddenly a bit excited. Are there ancient ruins or secret realms in the forest? That's not it. Lulu shook her head and said, this is because there is a special ore hidden in the lost forest. This ore can directly interfere with one's mind, so people can't escape from an illusion. Geological reason. He was happy for nothing. But then again, this was a material that could directly interfere with one's mind, which meant that it was a spiritual attributed material. Even a powerful creature like the elves would be affected by this ore, which meant that the energy contained in this ore was very strong. Lulu saw that Chu Tian was deep in thought and couldn't help asking in a curious voice, what are you thinking about? Oh, nothing much. You should know that I am a scholar, and as a scholar, I have a strong desire to explore and learn. Chu Tian rubbed his chin and said, when I heard you talk about the special scene in the Lost Forest, I couldn't help being a bit curious. What kind of material could cause this kind of interference? So it's like this. Lulu thought for a few seconds before saying, then I'll bring you in to see. Isn't this a forbidden area? It's no matter, the flower fairies have different physiques, so they can resist the illusion. Lulu often goes in to collect nectar, so there won't be any safety problems. Chapter 383. The flower fairies did not have an upper limit to their lifespan. As long as they were not killed by an external force or their living environment was destroyed, the flower fairies could live forever. They would never grow old or fall sick. It was unknown how many years the surrounding flower fairies had lived for, but they were as pure as children. Now with Lulu leading the several dozen flower fairies, they had already treated Chu Tian as a good friend. His shoulders, his head, and his clothes were all occupied by them. These little things were even easier to deceive than the elves, not having any vigilance at all. If Chu Tian had any bad intentions, these fellows would not be on guard against him at all. The lost forest is in front of us. Chu Tian looked through the dense shrubs and the forest in front of him was covered in a layer of fog. Chu Tian could feel that there was a very strong energy mixed in the fog. Pooh! The little fox was like a dog that smelled a meat bun as it suddenly jumped out of Chu Tian's clothes. Its two black eyes flashed with a look of surprise as it jumped out of Chu Tian's body into the shrubs. Lulu quickly shouted, Aya, it's dangerous. The fog in the lost forest was very dangerous. The spiritual energy radiating from the ground had been accumulated in the fog for thousands of years, therefore this fog was very destructive. Whether it was the elves, the treants, the demon beasts, or the insects, as long as they were living beings, as long as they had a thought, they would be affected by the spiritual energy and be forever lost in here. Lulu wanted to save the little fox, but she missed. The little fox turned into a mass of fog and teleported into the forest. The little fox stood in the fog and did not react at all. Rather it opened its mouth and took a deep breath. The fog in the surrounding several dozen meters was all swallowed into the little fox's stomach. Lulu looked at the little fox with wide eyes. Why does this little animal have this kind of ability? It's not a normal fox, there's no need to worry. Let's go. Chu Tian swaggered into the misty forest. The flower fairies surrounded Chu Tian, sprinkling large amounts of crystal pollen from their bodies. Chu Tian only smelled a refreshing fragrance and his mind immediately became clear, like he had just been washed in ice water. The flower fairies really did have some skill. Chu Tian breathed in the pollen released by the flower fairies. Not only was he not affected by the illusion, he felt his cultivation increase. This pollen could be considered a miracle medicine. Actually, whether it was Chu Tian or that damn fox, they both had special abilities and spiritual energy could not affect them. However, with the little flower fairy's special treatment, Chu Tian was happy to enjoy it, so he swaggered inside. This was the place where the ancient tree of life grew, so it was where the spiritual veins of the continent intersected. The spiritual energy here was very rich, so the treants, elves, and flower fairies lived here. In the surrounding forest, there were countless rare herbs and materials. If the other areas had been harvested by the elves, then the dense fog forest was undoubtedly a virgin land. For thousands of years, not many elves had set foot here. The flower fairies would at most gather dew and nectar, they would never gather materials. When Chu Tian walked into the dense fog forest, the ground was covered in herbs. There were very few level 2 herbs, most of them were level 3 elixirs, and there were even level 4 elixirs. Chu Tian stepped on a patch of grass and casually picked up a blade of grass. This grass looked very normal, but its roots were very thick and long, containing a dense spiritual energy. Blissful grass. Chu Tian recognized this grass. This kind of grass could be made into a kind of hallucinogen, which could be mixed with tobacco leaves or taken directly. In the end, it would be replaced with a strong mental stimulation, making people feel unparalleled pleasure, so it was a very valuable enjoyment item. This was a good thing. When Chu Tian traveled the continent in the past, he had seen it in a few royal families. The price of a single bag of high-quality blissful grass was enough to buy a city of several million people in a small kingdom. The grass Chu Tian was standing on had over 1 million stalks of high-quality blissful grass, all of which were several hundred years old. If this grass was flattened, a country like the southern summer country could buy several of them. The blissful grass was the most common herb in the lost forest. The little fox didn't even look at it. It burrowed into a shrub and grabbed a plant that looked like ginseng. The moment it pulled it out, it immediately discovered that the root of the herb was shaped like a human. Not only did it look like a human, it was almost like a living creature. Its 4 limbs were constantly struggling and it emitted a destructive spiritual sound wave from its mouth. Level 2 half-immortal herb, morning ginseng. Chu Tian didn't have time to stop it before the little fox swallowed it into its stomach. Then it used its 4 limbs to find another good herb. Chu Tian's nose almost went crooked from his anger. This fellow really didn't have the awareness of a pet. Chu Tian didn't have a way to stop it, so he could only swallow his anger and walk through the forest. At worst, he would think of a way to dig some out of this fellow's stomach. We can see the ore mine in front of us. Lulu flew forward and wherever it went, it would scatter pollen, guiding Chu Tian forward. In this kind of environment, divine sense was useless, so he could only rely on the flower fairy to lead the way. Chu Tian stepped over the top-quality herbs on the ground, but he was suddenly stunned because Chu Tian finally saw the ore mine. This was clearly a crystal mine and it was very rich, with large amounts of crystals being exposed to the surface. These were crystal bamboo shoots that looked like bamboo shoots. This kind of crystal stone that hadn't been refined was very rare in the natural world. It could only mean that the ore was very large and the purity was very high. It could even skip the purification step and it could be used as long as it was dug out. Lulu said to Chu Tian, "There are ores all over the ground and these ores are filled with spiritual energy. The flower fairies and treants don't know how to use them and the elves don't know how to use them, so this mine has been left here for thousands of years with no one caring for it." Chu Tian walked in front of a crystal bamboo shoot. The naturally formed crystal bamboo shoot was square-shaped. Although it wasn't a regular shape, this kind of large and pure ore still made Chu Tian feel very shocked. The most important thing was that this was a spiritual attributed material. The spiritual attributed was one of the rare attributes. No matter what kind of spiritual material it was very, very precious. Only this era's technology was lacking, so they hadn't found a way to use it yet. Chu Tian reached out and placed his hand on the spiritual energy. Lulu quickly said, "Be careful, the spiritual energy inside is very strong. If it invades your body, you'll suffer a disaster. Relax, I have a way to overcome it." The instant Chu Tian placed his hand on the crystal bamboo shoot, he felt his body tremble. A large amount of fog appeared around him and the entire world became silent. The flower fairies were gone. The forest was gone. The sky was gone. The earth was gone. There was only a world of white fog. This was the spiritual world created by the crystal bamboo shoot's spiritual energy. However, the crystal bamboo shoot's spiritual nature was neutral, so it didn't create nightmares, nor did it create beautiful fantasies. There was only a vast expanse of white fog. This spiritual power was so powerful that it could make people sink into it forever, and eventually die of exhaustion. The crystal bamboo shoots in the Lost Forest were even more dangerous than high-voltage electricity. As long as a normal person touched them, large amounts of spiritual energy would enter their body and cover their mind, blocking all senses and thoughts. Even if they were saved by their companions, they would forever be in a vegetative state. So strong, so strong. I never thought that I would encounter such a high-quality spiritual crystal. With a thought from Chu Tian, the nine-eyed demon god's energy came out and the incomparably thick white fog instantly evaporated. Chu Tian returned to the Lost Forest and he took his hand off the crystal. Lulu looked at Chu Tian in surprise. She was very curious why Chu Tian wasn't affected at all. "Can I dig out a piece to study?" "You don't need to be this polite. Not to mention things that no one wants, even if it's an important crystal, as long as you want it, the flower fairies will give it to you without any hesitation." Chu Tian smiled slightly and did not say anything else. He immediately dug out the 10-kilogram spirit crystal. He found a large piece of leaf and wrapped the spirit crystal around it a few times. This way, he could avoid direct contact with the spirit crystal, which would cause his mind to be affected. "Alright, I've already seen it. Now let's go see the flower fairies' home." Alright. The flower fairies happily flew around Chu Tian a few times and immediately led Chu Tian away from the Lost Forest. When Chu Tian arrived at the flower fairies' garden, the scene made Chu Tian dumbfounded. The flower fairies lived in a sea of flowers. The mountains and valleys were all filled with different colored flowers, with the big ones being the size of a house and the small ones being the size of a grain of rice. There were some that were as pure as a crystal and some that were as noble as emeralds. There were many beautiful purples and reds that were very shocking. There was a thick fragrance from the hundreds of flowers that made people feel like they were walking in a dream world. There were several hundred flower fairies moving through the garden. The flower fairies did not live in houses, but rather in the blooming flowers. Each flower fairy was in the shape of a little girl and they were flapping their transparent wings, dancing like butterflies in the flowers. Wherever they flew, there would be a large amount of glowing dust. Chu Tian said in a very shocked voice, "This is too beautiful." The flower fairies were very pure creatures. When Lulu and the others heard Chu Tian's praise, they all revealed smiles and immediately led Chu Tian into the garden. When the other flower fairies knew that Chu Tian had arrived, they all gathered around him. Just like several hundred beautiful butterflies, they surrounded Chu Tian and pulled Chu Tian to the flower fairies' place as a guest. The humans of this era did not know of the existence of these flower fairies, so they did not have any guard against humans at all. Although the elves were also kind creatures. In comparison, Chu Tian liked the flower fairies more because the flower fairies were simple and did not have any etiquette. They were as pure as crystals and were not complicated like the elves. This kind of race would be heavily persecuted by humans in the near future. When the flower fairies used the power of their race to cultivate the world tree sapling, they were deceived by humans, causing the sapling to be taken away. Countless flower fairies were captured and trained as slaves by humans, and there were even some flower fairies that were turned into pill materials by alchemists. Finally, this pure race became extinct. None of this had happened yet. Since he came to this era, Chu Tian needed to change these matters. Chapter 384. No one on the continent could compare to the flower fairies in terms of planting, so there were all kinds of heaven and earth treasures in the garden. There was no lack of immortal grade treasures, so it was no wonder the humans liked to invade the flower fairies' territory. Not only were the flower fairies themselves very valuable, the area they lived in was a natural treasure house. The flower fairies did not need to cultivate, so these treasures had no use to them. It was purely a hobby, so they would send out large amounts of precious gifts to their elven friends every year. Now that Chu Tian was a guest in the flower fairies' tribe, naturally he was warmly received. Chu Tian was sitting in a 100 flowers field, surrounded by beautiful and cute little flower fairies. These little beings had been here for thousands of years and they had never been more than 100 kilometers away. They had only seen the silent and intelligent Treants and the lively and friendly elves, but they had never seen a race from outside the continent. Chu Tian was the only outsider that had come to the flower fairies' garden in thousands of years. Most of the flower fairies had watched Miracle Commerce's movies before, so they were not unfamiliar with Chu Tian's appearance, rather they had a very familiar feeling. Therefore, when Chu Tian came to the flower fairies' garden, almost all the flower fairies ran over to see him. With a rough estimate, there were at least 2,000 flower fairies living in the garden. This was a very large number for the rare flower fairies. After all, the flower fairies were innate life forms, they could not reproduce after birth. Each one was a treasure bred by the forest. This is the fairy wine, only the flower fairies' best friends can taste it. Several flower fairies worked together to bring over a flower. The 7 colored petals were tightly packed, releasing a dense vitality. The flower bud was blooming and there was a gentle glow coming from it, as well as a liquid flowing inside. Chu Tian took in a soft breath. Suddenly, an incredible energy spread throughout his body. He felt as if every pore in his body had opened up, and every cell seemed to have been infused with an unprecedented life force. Just the aura had such a strong effect. It was not inferior to taking a sacred herb. If Chu Tian's guess wasn't wrong, this fairy wine was brewed with at least 3 kinds of immortal herbs, otherwise how could it have such a strong effect? Immortal herb, that was an immortal herb. Even in a place like the Forest of Chaos, immortal herbs were very rare, otherwise the elven tribe wouldn't be in such a mess after losing a piece of longevity grass. What a waste! What a waste! Using celestial treasures to brew wine. This winemaking method was so ordinary, not even a tenth of the value of a stock of medicine could be developed, and more than half of a few stocks of immortal medicine were wasted just like that. If this wasn't a waste of heavenly resources, then what was it for? Chu Tian raised his cup and emptied it in one gulp. The fairy wine brewed by the flower essence did not have the slightest taste of ordinary alcohol. It only had an incomparably rich fragrance of 100 flowers. That kind of wonderful and joyful feeling was definitely not something that ordinary wine could bring, because this kind of experience had long since surpassed the senses, entering deep into the heart, the spirit, and the soul. Chu Tian felt that every cell in his body was filled with dense spiritual energy. His entire body seemed to have transformed into a precious medicine that absorbed the spiritual energy of all living things. When his spirit energy received an unprecedented nourishment and replenishment, it instantly soared by leaps and bounds. Chu Tian felt that his pores were overflowing with profound qi, and his whole body was like an inflated balloon, almost unable to bear the sudden spiritual pressure. The flower fairies flew around Chu Tian and reached out their hands to Chu Tian. A mark lit up on each flower fairy's forehead, allowing all the energy to flow back into Chu Tian's body. Chu Tian could clearly feel that there was a gentle energy entering his body, helping Chu Tian transform the large amount of spiritual energy into spirit energy. This transformation efficiency was even higher than Chu Tian's own. Truly not bad. Other than healing, alchemy, and treasure hunting abilities, the flower fairies were actually perfect assistants for cultivation. If there were flower fairies by his side to help him cultivate, not only would they provide spiritual energy, it would increase the chances of breaking through bottlenecks, it would also greatly increase his cultivation efficiency, achieving twice the result with half the effort. Chu Tian immediately sat down and began to refine the fairy wine. The spirit energy in his body wildly surged, going from the 8th awakened soul layer to the peak 8th awakened soul layer. Finally it directly broke through the bottleneck. Hong! A powerful and dignified energy instantly covered the entire flower fairy garden. Large amounts of illusions appeared in the sky, like there was a 9-eyed demon god holding a black burning demon god's blade piercing into the sky. Such a strong pressure. Such a strong aura. The flower fairies were all stunned. There seemed to be an incomparably strong energy hidden in Chu Tian's body. In the Traiant forest, Cenarius opened his eyes again. When he saw the strange phenomenon in the flower fairy garden, this old Traiant that had lived for 10,000 years actually revealed a look of shock and disbelief. Although he could sense that this human wasn't ordinary, he didn't expect him to be this strong. This potential was the most terrifying that Cenarius had ever seen in his life. In his long memory, he couldn't find anyone that could match it. Elven tribe. Vivian first demonstrated the void-escaping cultivation technique, which made the elven elders feel an unprecedented shock. This special and incomparably creative spatial movement technique was a miraculous existence. Vivian had just cultivated it for 2 months without using any materials, so she had not reached the small success realm. She could ignore any attack that wasn't in the 4th true spirit layer. There was a very important key word. It wasn't defending against attacks. It was ignoring attacks. There was a fundamental difference between the two. A true spirit cultivator could easily block a body refinement cultivator's attack, and even if 1,000 body refinement cultivators surrounded them, they wouldn't be able to kill a true spirit cultivator. But no matter how weak a body refinement cultivator's attack was, a true spirit cultivator would still consume spirit energy to block it. 1,000 body refinement cultivators couldn't kill a true spirit cultivator. 2,000, 3,000, 10,000, 100,000. Once a true spirit cultivator ran out of spirit energy, they weren't any stronger than normal people. Low-level cultivators could use numbers to kill high-level cultivators. But it was different when cultivating the void escaping. Vivian was no longer defending against low-level cultivators' attacks, rather she was avoiding them on a spatial level, ignoring any cultivators' attacks. As long as they didn't reach the upper limit, it didn't matter how many there were. Vivian could ignore attacks from cultivators below the 4th true spirit layer. This meant that even if she passed through an army of 1,000,000, she wouldn't be injured at all. Even if there were 1,000,000 first and second true spirit layer cultivators attacking her, as long as the attack was strong enough to break the spatial barrier, then no matter how many there were or how long the attack lasted, it wouldn't matter. Not only would Vivian not be injured at all, she wouldn't even consume a bit of spirit energy. What a mysterious cultivation technique. What a sensational effect. If it was cultivated to the large success realm, with Vivian's cultivation in the 4th true spirit layer, she would be immune to attacks in the 7th or 8th true spirit layer. Vivian had an innate spatial attack, others couldn't attack her, but she could attack them. This was simply unsolvable. Of course. The elves didn't know enough about the void escaping. This void escaping was indeed immune to all physical and energy attacks, but spatial attacks, soul attacks, and divine sense attacks could still deal with her. Isn't it just a broken medicine? I'll compensate you. Vivian's stomach was filled with grievance and dissatisfaction. Even 100 herbs can't be exchanged for this cultivation technique. Not to mention that Chu Tian has taught me an even more precious technique that can change the world. The elves all believed Chu Tian's words now. This fellow really was a genius and not a normal genius. Ulysses suppressed the shock in his heart. Then what spatial technology? Please show it to us. Vivian definitely couldn't summon the space warehouse. Although she had the space warehouse's technology, the energy source was a problem the elves couldn't solve. Only Miracle Commerce's special energy column could provide a stable and efficient source of spirit energy. Therefore, once they left Miracle Commerce, Vivian couldn't use the space warehouse. However, Vivian had drawn the incomparably profound spatial source energy array. When they saw the unprecedented source energy array, each elf's mind almost collapsed. How was this technology? This was simply a miracle. The elves had always been proud. This was because the elves' civilization was several tens of thousands of years older than the humans. The elves all had profound knowledge and could compare to the top scholars of the human race, so the elves didn't put the humans in their eyes. Although they knew that the human civilization was developing quickly, if they wanted to catch up to the elves, it would be impossible in 10,000 years. When this source energy array appeared in front of them, The elves' pride and self-respect was completely crushed. The elves didn't need to feel how magical the space warehouse was. Just this spatial source energy array in front of them was already a technology that the elves couldn't compare to in tens of thousands of years. When had the human civilization developed to the point where the elves had to look up to them? This was the first time they felt a strong sense of defeat. At the same time, they felt a sense of danger. The elves were fighting with the spirit beasts, fighting for the position of the continent's #1 race, but the super races had already quietly risen. Whether it was the intelligent elves or the brave spirit beasts, they had all underestimated the humans. There was indeed a misunderstanding on this matter. Chu Tian had this kind of cultivation technique and technology, so why would he cheat the elves of a level 2 immortal herb? This didn't make sense at all. Vivian said, whether it is strength or civilization, the humans can't compare to the elves. Only Chu Tian is different, his wisdom surpasses the elves by at least 100,000 years. Ulysses quickly said to the elves beside him, immediately invite Chu Tian back. Although this was very shameful, the elves didn't dare move against Chu Tian. If the elves really killed Chu Tian, not only would their entire race be shamed, it would also set the stage for a war between the humans and the elves. Whether he was alive or dead. This person's actions were enough to change the continent's history. When the elves came out, the world began to tremble. A magnificent heaven and earth phenomenon appeared from the flower fairy gardens and the elves were stunned once again. Chapter 385. Chu Tian had jumped 2 levels after drinking a cup of fairy wine, going from the 8th awakened soul layer to the peak 8th awakened soul layer and then to the 9th awakened soul layer. Moreover, he did not go into closed-door cultivation for several days and the entire process was completed in an hour. This was something that could not have been done before, it was all because of the strength of the fairy wine and the flower fairy's help. Life really was full of surprises. He had accidentally become stronger by a large amount again. When he was caught by the elves, how could he have thought that he would have this kind of fortuitous encounter? Chu Tian opened his eyes and did not have time to speak before he saw the little fox lazily lying in the grass. There was a group of flower fairies serving it, bringing out all kinds of precious nectar and strange fruits. The little fox did not reject anything as it stuffed it into its mouth. It had directly drank more than 10 cups of the incomparably precious fairy wine. Lulu and the flower fairies also had surprised expressions, the little white fox is not full yet, take out a bit more. Don't take it, don't take it. Chu Tian quickly jumped up, this fox can't eat its fill, it's useless no matter how much you take. Moreover, it only eats and doesn't poop, so no matter how precious it is, it's a waste. Damn fox. Damn fox. Taking advantage of the master not paying attention to eat and drink, how many priceless resources were wasted. If these resources were given to father, it would be more than enough for him to reach the 1st to 2nd true spirit layer. The little fox was slowly enjoying itself, but when it saw Chu Tian, it was shocked. It instantly swept everything in front of it into its stomach, afraid that Chu Tian would be as strong as it was. The flower fairies let out a burst of exclamations, the little white fox really can eat. Nonsense. Was this fox something that could be fed full? If the fox stayed in the flower fairy's garden for 3-5 days, it would eat all the treasures the garden had stored for 1,000 years. Although the flower fairies were simple and didn't care, it wasn't easy for other people to store treasures. Chu Tian quickly picked up the little fox, not allowing it to stay any longer. The little fox made a face and rubbed its round belly. It didn't matter, it had eaten enough anyway. After all, it had eaten a large amount in the Lost Forest and now it had eaten in the Flower Fairy's garden, the energy it had accumulated was very strong. Even for the little fox, it was still full. This is the gift that little Bai Hu wants. Several flower fairies carried several purple puppets over. When the little fox saw the puppet, it immediately revealed a happy grin. It bluntly used its claws to grab it and cupped its hands to the flower fairies. It made a grateful gesture, making the flower fairies laugh. These things were none other than 3 soul puppets. In order to cover the retreat of Southern Xia's front line, the little fox puppet was dropped there and couldn't be retrieved. From then on, the little fox no longer had the ability to summon. Now that the flower fairies had sent 3 soul puppets, each one was of a higher quality than before. This meant that the little fox could store the source spirits of 3 powerful demon beasts, and its battle strength would be even stronger in the future. Lulu flew in front of Chu Tian and said, "The fairy wine is really helpful to you. We will get you a few more cups." The enthusiasm of the flower fairies made Chu Tian very moved. "No, there's no need." Chu Tian was not being polite, but he was limited by his current strength. A single drop of the fairy wine was enough to have a large effect on him, and he wouldn't be able to completely absorb it in a month. Now that he had broken through 2 levels, he really couldn't drink a treasure like the fairy wine. Good things can be tasted. If it is too much, it will become cheaper. I'll leave it for my future guests. Chu Tian did not have the little fox's abnormal digestive ability. If he drank another cup of fairy wine, perhaps it would harm his body. The flower fairies needed a long time to brew a cup of fairy wine. This kind of top-quality immortal wine couldn't be wasted. Thank you very much for helping me increase my cultivation base. Chu Tian did not have any good points, but he had to repay a drop of water. The flower fairies helping Chu Tian would also give the flower fairies some benefits. So, Chu Tian directly said, "I want to give the flower fairies a good gift. I want to create a world for you all." Create a world? What did he want to do? The flower fairies were confused. Was this something a mortal could do? Chu Tian took out the spiritual crystal from the lost forest. "Now I ask the flower fairies to create a new world with me." All right. All right. But can we also create a world? If I say we can, then we can. Chu Tian revealed a confident smile. He immediately placed the crystal on the ground. "Let's begin." The flower fairies were very pure, so no matter how ridiculous this was, they were not willing to doubt it. They only wanted to believe it was true because in their eyes, the wise and friendly Chu Tian would not lie to them. In fact, in the flower fairies' vocabulary, there was no such thing as lying. Therefore, all the flower fairies believed him and looked at Chu Tian with looks of anticipation. Chu Tian first placed a large source energy array, and it was a never-before-seen source energy array. It was completely different from any source energy array he had placed before. The flower fairies saw the incomparably complex source energy array being placed bit by bit. Although they didn't understand what kind of source energy array it was, with the flower fairies' innate ability to sense energy, they could feel that the source energy array was releasing a very rhythmic and profound spiritual energy. Chu Tian placed the spiritual crystal in the eye of the source energy array and then had the little fox spit out several energy pillars. He placed the energy pillars at the base of the array and the entire source energy array was instantly activated. A strong and vigorous spiritual energy continued to flow through the large array. Although it couldn't be seen, it could be felt as a spiritual barrier. Spiritual energy was a rare kind of energy. The continent did not know the principle behind this energy. Therefore, using a source energy array to express spiritual energy was something that the current civilization could not do. Therefore, there was no doubt that this was something that surpassed this era. Chu Tian said to the flower fairies, "Come with me." After saying this, Chu Tian walked onto the source energy array and the flower fairies followed. When the flower fairies entered the source energy array, they immediately felt spiritual energy enter their minds. With the flower fairies' innate talent and physique, they could easily resist this kind of spiritual energy. Chu Tian said, "Open your mind and accept it." The flower fairies did not have any vigilance and immediately did as Chu Tian said. The spiritual energy slowly and steadily entered their minds. Everyone was quickly affected by the spiritual energy and illusions began to appear around them. Lulu and the sisters found that they had appeared in an endless prairie. The prairie was very vast and they couldn't see the end. When the warm wind blew into their bodies, it made them feel warm. Even if they knew it was an illusion, it still felt like it was real. At this time, there was a strong wind coming from above and a large shadow covered the ground. When the flower fairies looked up, they were all stunned by what they saw. A 50-meter-long green dragon was currently spreading its large wings. It was as shocking as a mountain as it appeared above their heads. Lulu. Chu Tian stood on the back of the giant dragon and looked at the flower fairies with a proud expression. "I'm here." The flower fairy's eyes went wide in surprise. Chu Tian gently snapped his fingers and the green dragon exploded, turning into countless flower petals that fell down like beautiful rain, instantly covering the grass. Chu Tian landed on the ground like a feather. "This is all an illusion. I have already given you spiritual permission, so you can also do it. Give it a try." The flower fairies used their spiritual energy. A large number of trees suddenly rushed out of the originally endless grassland, instantly covering the entire grassland. The originally grassland suddenly turned into a boundless forest. The flower fairies quickly discovered this. In this spiritual world, there was nothing they couldn't do. As long as they wanted something, they could make it appear. An illusion was not strange. It was not strange to be able to control an illusion. It was hard to imagine such an incomparably realistic and unscrupulous illusion that could be controlled as one pleased. The flower fairies swam around in the illusion. Sometimes it would turn into a forest, sometimes it would turn into a sea of flowers, and sometimes it would turn into an ocean. All kinds of animals could also appear. This was simply like a fantasy paradise. Chu Tian asked as he observed the illusion, "How is it?" The flower fairies were having fun. "We only knew that illusions could harm people, but we never thought it could be used like this. This is truly too mysterious." Chu Tian gave a laugh. "There is something even more mysterious. The spiritual world's time is not the same as the material world. I can greatly slow down the flow of time in the spiritual paradise. A day here might be an hour or even less in the outside world." The flower fairies clicked their tongues in wonder, but they did not think too deeply about it. This was because the flower fairies were a race that would not die of old age, so they did not have any concept of time passing by. However, if this was placed in the human world, it would cause a large stir. This meant that humans living in the spiritual world would increase their lifespan by several times or even several dozen times. To humans with short lifespans, this was a blessing from the heavens. Why was Chu Tian so erudite? This was because in the era Chu Tian lived in, spiritual technology was already very developed. Chu Tian had a photographic memory and a strong cultivation base allowed him to endure a higher rate of time reversal. When Chu Tian studied in the spiritual library for a year, several decades would have passed in the outside world. So even though he was very young, he had a rare amount of knowledge and there was no one in this era that could surpass him. Chu Tian was less than 100 years old in both of his lives, but his school years were several dozen times that of his age. Even elves could not compare to him. After the lost forest was discovered by Chu Tian, the lost crystal was stable and powerful, so it was the best material to create a spiritual world. The value of this thing was not as simple as creating illusions. If Chu Tian could create a spiritual research room, the Yun sect's research efficiency would increase by 10 times. If he could create a spiritual library, it would be much easier to find talents and scholars. Even when the spiritual technology research reached its peak, Chu Tian could create a spiritual network. This network would connect every person's mind, forming a spiritual network that covered every race, the forest, and even the continent. The spiritual world would become a second world to the real world and everyone would have a new identity in the spiritual world. There would be all kinds of entertainment, learning, communication, living, and etc. The continent would enter the era of the spiritual network. Chu Tian, Vivian, and the elves worked together to open the spatial technology. Now they planned on working with the flower fairies to explore the new treasure of spiritual technology. Chapter 386. Why did he cooperate with the flower fairies? Actually, not mentioning personal feelings, the flower fairies were people worth roping in. This was an outstanding support race. Healing, treasure hunting, planting, scouting, assisting in cultivation, and assisting in battle. With many different abilities, they were natural helpers. The flower fairies were very pure, so there was no need to be on guard against them. Moreover, once the flower fairies trusted and supported him, they would do their best to help him. Because they were innately born, the flower fairies were very suited to building a spiritual world and a spiritual network. Not everyone could create a spiritual space. Every spiritual space was like opening up a new world. Everything, including the operating laws, was created by the Creator one by one. If the laws of the spiritual space were unstable or conflicted, the spiritual space would not last long and would be destroyed. Chu Tian did not have anyone qualified for this job yet. Just like how spatial engineers needed innate spatial energy, spiritual engineers needed innate spiritual energy. Even after several tens of thousands of years, spiritual engineers were a profession comparable to alchemists and array masters, or even more popular. This was because there were many people that could become alchemists and array masters, but there were very few that could become spiritual engineers. After all, spiritual energy was very rare, and this made the price of a spiritual engineer very high. There was a large demand for spiritual engineers. This was because a spiritual space that could hold tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of people without collapsing, it needed an engineer to create and maintain it. Of course, Chu Tian's current source energy computer had not been developed yet, so he could not calculate the spiritual parameters with the computer's supercomputing power. Therefore, it was impossible to create a large spiritual world that could hold a country or even a race. However, if he could train suitable people, a small spiritual space was not a problem. Chu Tian had the basic knowledge of spiritual energy, and the flower fairies were innately more sensitive to the laws of nature than normal beings. Moreover, the entire race had innate spiritual energy. The flower fairies were without a doubt a very good choice. This was a very good opportunity for the flower fairies. There was no race in this world that could be biased. The forest of chaos followed the dark law of the forest, but wasn't the entire continent the same? The personalities, beliefs, and lifestyles of the various races were different, and these differences were the source of conflict. War could not be avoided, and the weak would always be enslaved by the strong. The flower fairies did not have any battle strength, but they were very precious. If they were discovered by humans, spirit beasts, or other races, the final result would not be good. The entire elven race was declining, and they could barely take care of themselves, so this protective umbrella could not be relied on. If the flower fairies wanted to survive, they could only rely on themselves. If they cooperated with miracle commerce and gained control of the spiritual technology, the flower fairies would have a place on the continent. It would be enough for them to negotiate with other countries and provide their race with a stronger foundation. Chu Tian began to persuade the flower fairies. Can we create more mental spaces? You can even create a virtual world directly so that people of different races and identities can communicate in it. The flower fairies lived carefree lives, not having any sense of suffering and not pursuing material pleasures. Only spiritual and artistic things could attract the love and pursuit of the flower fairies. Chu Tian had drawn a perfect blueprint in just a few words, making the flower fairies yearn for it. The flower fairies were a race that was hard to win over. This was not because their personalities were bad, rather it was because the flower fairies' personalities were too good, so they were hard to win over. Why are there wars in the world? Why was there killing in the world? Why was there plundering in the world? That was purely the result of human desire, just like what Chu Tian and Cenarius had said, humans are greedy, so there is competition. Humans are selfish, so there are thieves. Humans are greedy, so there are people who are obsessed with pleasure. Humans are cruel and greedy, so there is killing and violence. The flower fairies were different. They were born from the spiritual energy of the world, absorbing the essence of all living things. They would not grow old, would not get sick, and had no desires. They were naturally happy, so they were easily satisfied. They could not be easily moved. It was hard to use money, resources, love, or other benefits to entice them. There was only one recorded human method to control the flower fairies, which was to create a kind of mind-destroying medicine. With a special method to forcefully tame them, the flower fairies would lose their nature and turn into puppets, allowing the humans to control them. Chu Tian was not stupid enough to explain how great the future of this technology was. What use did it have for the flower fairies? A race that did not need to eat, drink, and cultivate, how could they be interested in making money? What meaning was there in changing history to the flower fairies? A race that had no parents, no country, and did not age or get sick, what meaning did it have? But Chu Tian believed in one thing. It was impossible for a being to not have any desires. The flower fairies were immortal, but the flower fairies were very dependent on their environment. If their environment was destroyed, the flower fairies would not be able to live. Look, the people of the continent were building houses, castles, palaces, and lakes. They were wantonly cutting down forests, wildly hunting animals, and polluting the environment. The forest of chaos was very large. The forest was in the middle of several empires. Who could guarantee that the forest of chaos would remain the same after tens of thousands of years? So they had to develop spiritual technology. Because people had rich spiritual energy, their pursuit of material things would decrease. Didn't people like destroying things? They could just destroy things in the spiritual space. Didn't people like palaces and temples? They could just build them in the spiritual space. This virtual world wouldn't pollute the environment no matter what. Chu Tian used reason to move the flower fairies, making them feel that it was very reasonable. The only thing they cared about was their homeland. So once spiritual technology was popularized, people could reduce the amount of war and natural pollution. The flower fairies all looked at Chu Tian in worship. Intelligent, smart, kind, and far-sighted, the flower fairies were too lucky to have this kind of friend. The flower fairies trusted and worshipped Chu Tian, and adding in their love for spiritual technology, as well as Chu Tian's environmental protection, the flower fairies finally made an important decision. They wanted to join miracle commerce. They wanted to create a spiritual era. Chu Tian sat on the ground chatting with the flower fairies, and the flower fairies became more and more excited. Their lives were very ordinary before, gathering dew and pollen every day and taking care of the garden when they had nothing to do. They never had a goal in life. But now it was different. The flower fairies wanted to learn spiritual technology from Chu Tian. They wanted to use the crystals in the lost forest to create an interesting and fun spiritual space. It's done. They had another reliable ally. Chu Tian could really be proud. This could be considered a first. When everyone was talking about this topic, large amounts of horned eagles suddenly appeared in the sky above the garden. There was an elf holding a bow riding on the back of each horned eagle, and the one leading them was a powerful dragon eagle. It's the elves. This is bad, they must be here to capture Chu Tian. The flower fairies were now completely convinced that Chu Tian was not a bad person. How could this kind of intelligent person who was passionate about protecting the forest be a bad person? Aeldis jumped off the back of the dragon eagle and instantly landed in front of Chu Tian. She said with a cold expression, "You, return to the tribe, the elves will announce the verdict." What are you acting like? Who doesn't know that you elves are begging me? Chu Tian didn't need to guess to know that the elves should have already understood the consequences and wanted to ask Chu Tian to return. Only Aeldis was naturally cold and she couldn't put down her face, so her expression was very stiff. He had to admit his wrongs. What kind of attitude was this? Chu Tian was very dissatisfied. He suddenly thought of something and said, "You elves are very hesitant, don't you just want to kill me? Just kill me with an arrow, there's no need to say so much." Aeldis' brows jumped up. "Stop!" The flower fairies shouted, "Chu Tian is the flower fairy's good friend, we have already cooperated with Chu Tian. He is a good person, the elves' groundless accusation is not valid, we will not agree to it. That's right. The elves, go back. Chu Tian will not go with you. The flower fairies surrounded Chu Tian, using their little bodies to block in front of him. It seemed like they would protect Chu Tian with their lives. Aeldis was a bit stunned. He obtained the trust of the flower fairies this quickly. How did this human do it? Cooperation. Flower fairies. This kind of saying was enough to make the elves surprised. The flower fairies were a mysterious race, but in the end they were a weak race without any battle strength. Moreover, their population was very small, only a small group in the entire forest. Why would the human cooperate with the flower fairies? The flower fairies stood aloof from worldly affairs and lived a peaceful life, so why would they be moved? The flower fairies want to create a world with miracle commerce, changing the lives of the people of the continent, reducing the wars on the continent, and protecting our forest. The flower fairies were all very proud and they said with a firm attitude, the elves don't need to do anything. Chu Tian is a gift given to us by the forest divinity, he is the messenger of peace, he is definitely not a bad person. Elves, go away. Elves, go away. The flower fairies charged out to drive away the elves. The flower fairies were pitifully weak, but the elves did not dare to move against them. When they saw the flower fairies pledge their lives to protect Chu Tian and Chu Tian standing in the middle of the flower fairies with his arms crossed, revealing a proud smile that deserved a beating, the elves almost spat out blood from anger. This fellow was clearly doing this on purpose. But, what kind of demonic technique did this fellow use? He actually made the flower fairies run around in circles. The flower fairy Lulu said, have Ulysses cancel all the accusations against Chu Tian, otherwise the flower fairies will not allow the elves to touch a single hair on Chu Tian. Cancel all the accusations. Cancel all the accusations. The flower fairies began to loudly shout. Second elder, what do we do? Aeldis was riding a tiger and could not get off. The elves did not plan on killing Chu Tian, but if they couldn't explain it, where would the elves put their face? We can't harm the flower fairies. We're going back first. The elves were given the cold shoulder and could only resentfully leave. Chapter 387. Aeldis told the elves what had happened when she returned to the tribe. What? He's not coming. The elves were anxious and angry. Did this human really think he could eat the elves? Damn, his cultivation was clearly this weak, even a child from the elven tribe could defeat him. What gave him the confidence to not place the elves in his eyes? This was simply preposterous. When had these noble and proud elves ever suffered this kind of anger? The flower fairies did not have any strength, but they were still the elves' friends. They provided large amounts of top-quality medicine and resources for the elves, helping the elves grow stronger, so they had to give the flower fairies face. We have a 1,000-year friendship with the flower fairies, we can't break it because of this matter. Ulysses knit his brows, I want to know what happened in the spirit flower garden. I'll immediately find a flower fairy and ask her. The elves immediately found a flower fairy. The flower fairies also wanted to resolve the conflict between Chu Tian and the elves, so they told them everything. It's roughly like this. The flower fairy simply explained the matter, other than creating the spiritual space, the flower fairies are also preparing to make movies. Some of the flower fairy sisters have already started preparing and will go with Chu Tian to his small town in a few days. Movies were related to the spiritual space. With the flower fairies' help, the movies would be even better and would be even better to watch. Moreover, the flower fairies liked movies, so Chu Tian gave this job to the flower fairies. The elves were shocked. The flower fairies had not left the garden in 1,000 years. How could they leave just because of a stranger? The flower fairies were very weak, did they not know that this was very dangerous? Ulysses broke out in a cold sweat, But he was not shocked by the flower fairy's decision, rather he was shocked by another important matter. You're saying that Chu Tian picked up a crystal stone in the lost forest and immediately developed a new technology, creating a stable existence that can accommodate many people, as well as an illusion that can exist in time. That's right. It's like this. Chu Tian had left the tribe for several hours and he did not know about the lost forest before this. It was purely an impromptu situation, suddenly creating a new technology. Was this person still a person? How many more sensational miracles did he have to create? Hearing this, Aildis suddenly felt a bit regretful. If she had known earlier, she would have agreed to this guy a few days ago. If she could make Chu Tian owe her a favor, she would be able to exchange it for great benefits for the elves. Vivian was right. Chu Tian's knowledge and wisdom were at least 100,000 years ahead of the elves. If left alone for 10 or 20 years, this human might very well change the entire continent. If the elven race remained stagnant and did not make any progress, it was very likely that they would be eliminated in this era of change. The flower fairy did not know the complicated feelings of the elves. Chu Tian said that this technology must be developed. Because in the future, he would create a super huge spiritual world, and all the races in the world would be able to enter and communicate with each other. Not only would this reduce the distance between people, but it would also reduce the consumption of energy, resources, wars, and killings in the real world, thus protecting the forest and the environment. Such a noble dream is not something a bad person can think of, so the elves must drop the accusations against Chu Tian, otherwise the flower fairies will not allow the elves to approach him. The flower fairy's voice was very firm. In the flower fairy's eyes, Chu Tian was not just a genius, he was also a great saint that could save the world. With this person in this world, everyone's lives would become better and there would be fewer wars and deaths. If the elves killed him, they would be committing an eternal sin. Whether it was for Chu Tian or for the elves, the flower fairy would not allow this matter to happen. Also, Cenarius also said this. The flower fairy suddenly thought of something. He has already made his decision to have the flower fairies bring the ancient tree of life seed with Chu Tian. Ulysses was shocked again. What? What? The ancient tree of life seed. Can this be casually taken away? There is only one seed in the entire forest of Chaos Elves. What would happen if something were to happen to it? Cenarius cannot take this responsibility. There was more than one ancient tree of life on the continent. Therefore there was more than one group of elves. In the entire forest of Chaos Elves, there was only one ancient tree of life and there was only one ancient tree of life seed. Although there was no way to make it germinate, it was still a sacred object in the hearts of the elves. This seed had been kept by the Treant Cenarius for a long time. The flower fairies were in charge of finding a way to raise it and the elves had been paying close attention to it. Now it was good. They actually wanted to take the seed away. If it was taken away by someone else, who could take responsibility for this? The flower fairy explained, we and the Treants can't find a way to raise the ancient tree of life, but Chu Tian said he has confidence in activating the seed, so Cenarius has decided to let Chu Tian give it a try. The elves almost collapsed when they heard this. How many earth-shattering things did Chu Tian have to do before he was willing? Spatial technology, spiritual technology, any one of them was a profound elemental energy science worthy of thousands of years of research. Now, he had even said that he wanted to save the ancient tree of life seed. If he could really do it, then this person's intelligence was something that even the ancient gods could not compare to. The elves are too stingy on this matter. The flower fairy said in a somewhat complaining voice, didn't Chu Tian just use an elven immortal herb? He didn't steal it and he has already repaid it 100 times over. If we still pursue this matter, the elves are too ungentlemanly. At worst the flower fairies will compensate the elves with 10 even better immortal herbs. This was not a problem with the herb at all. It was just a trivial level 2 immortal herb, these elven elders did not care about it at all. The key was the human identity and Princess Vivian's identity. The two of them caused quite a stir in the tribe. Humans were a large race made up of hypocrisy. The most important rule of the elves was that the elves, especially the female elves, were forbidden from interacting with humans. Vivian's actions were a large taboo and she was involved in the war between the humans and the spirit beasts. This violated at least 10 of the clan's rules, which was why it was like this. The flower fairies did not know the dangers of the world and their way of thinking was too simple. Vice Speaker, what do you think about this matter? There's no other way, we were wrong this time. Vivian has really found an incredible person for the elves. Ulysses shook his head. The Elven King has always been seeking reform, but the conservative faction is too strong. This might be a great opportunity for the elves and since it's already in front of us, we should grab hold of him. We have opened the Elven Court with great fanfare and all the fellows in the tribe are paying attention to this matter. I'm afraid. If we let him go, what will the Elven Council do? Respecting the virtuous is a matter of course, losing a bit of face is not worth mentioning. Me and the Elven King will naturally settle the voices of the council. If it was said, Chu Tian would not believe it. Actually the elves had always been divided into reformists and conservatives. Vivian's father was the current Elven King and he was a leader that advocated for reform. Under the leadership of the Elven King, the elves had gained 3 more cities in 100 years and their sphere of influence had increased by 20%. The conservative faction of the elves was always the strongest and their representative was the Elven Council's chairman. His influence in the elves was not below the Elven King's. Those were the real old-fashioned people who followed etiquette and rules and pursued the rule of inaction and letting nature take its course. It was impossible for the Elven King to not care about his daughter, but because of his status, he couldn't personally interfere, so he sent his trusted Ulysses to deal with this matter. When Vivian was sentenced, she would be locked up for 10-20 years at most and wouldn't be severely punished. Now the situation was different. Ulysses needed to take some other actions. He brought several elven elders and once again came to the flower fairy's garden. This was Chu Tian enjoying himself. When he saw the elves return, his face immediately sunk. What, you've come to catch me again? Mr. Chu Tian, perhaps there has been a misunderstanding between us. Ulysses' old face squeezed out a smile, clearly not used to this kind of humble attitude towards humans. I have already investigated it clearly. I hope that your excellency can openly communicate with the elves and clear up this misunderstanding. The elves were the flower fairies' friends. Chu Tian was also a friend of the flower fairies. If friends could solve their conflicts, of course it would be a good thing. Lulu immediately jumped up in joy. I already said that the elves would understand. Chu Tian wanted to tease the noble elves, but seeing this situation, he gave up. Chu Tian also wanted to go back earlier. After all, the elves' efficiency was too low and he was afraid of being delayed for 10-15 days. He was afraid that Miracle Commerce's development in the Forest of Chaos would be affected. Then what do you think we should do? Ulysses saw that there was a change in the situation and immediately let out a sigh of relief. Because this matter is very important, we need to discuss it with the Elven Council before making a final decision. But since it is a misunderstanding, the Elven Council will not make it hard for you, so can you come with us? Still have a meeting? I'll start your head. The elves are very slow at doing things. If it is delayed for half a year, would Father's company of over 100,000 people go hungry? Fuck the Elven Council. Chu Tian's eyes sparkled a few times before he suddenly revealed a smile. Go to the Elven Council. Alright, I also want to ask for compensation from the Elven Council. Compensation request. The elves stared at him. What compensation request? Are you playing dumb? Vivian is an employee trained by Miracle Commerce and has a contract with Miracle Commerce. Now that she has learned Miracle Commerce's highest-level secret technology, she has been taken back by you fellows and locked up for 200 years. Chu Tian said in a very impolite voice, 200 years. This is too much for us humans. Miracle Commerce will suffer a large loss because of this. Could it be that I don't even have the right to ask for compensation? Then how much compensation do you want? Have you evaluated the value of the spatial technology? I don't want much, just give me 5 elven cities. Ulysses almost spat out blood. The elves didn't even have 10 cities in the forest. This fellow wanted to give him 5 cities, wasn't this asking for the elves' lives? Chu Tian glanced at the elves and was very dissatisfied with their expressions. Don't the elves advocate justice and fairness? Even though Vivian's spatial technology was just a drop in the bucket compared to mine, its value wasn't something that 5 small cities in the forest could compare to. I had suffered a huge loss. You've taken advantage of it and now you want to burn the bridge? Is this the fairness of the elves? The elves whispered among themselves. Ulysses wiped his sweat and said, the elves can't pay this kind of compensation request, not to mention Vivian's punishment still needs to be discussed, so. I don't care that much. You've wasted so many days of my time, shouldn't you compensate me a bit? Chu Tian unreasonably said. I don't want much, 100,000 high-grade source stones is enough. The veins on Ulysses' forehead popped out. The elves didn't do business, so they were very poor. What did 100,000 high-grade source stones mean? Was this brat crazy? No, they couldn't bring him back. If this fellow went to the Elven Council, he would definitely cause chaos among the elves. Chapter 388. Chu Tian was clearly asking for a sky-high price to scare people, but the elves were a strict and serious race. If he really asked the Elven Council for compensation, the Elven Council would have no choice but to accept it. This person was eloquent and the elves were stiff, so even if the elves could not compensate him this much, they would still suffer a large loss. In just a short day, he had obtained the support of the flower fairies and was given an important task by Cenarius. Adding in the fact that his identity and abilities were not simple, even if the elves were angry, they could not move against him. They could not let him cause trouble in the council. There was no benefit in angering those old elves. Ulysses wiped his sweat. The Elven Council is very busy dealing with the large and small matters of the tribe. Even if you ask for compensation, with this kind of complex and large compensation, it won't be finished in 10-20 years. Our elves can wait, but humans can't wait that long. How about you go back first and we'll talk about compensation later? Chu Tian did not think about compensation at all. Even if the Forest of Chaos elves did not lose to a warring kingdom, their economic ability was very poor. This was because the elves did not do business on the continent, so they did not have a commodity economy. It was purely a self-sufficient small farming economy, simply saying that the entire race was poor. It's not impossible for me to go back. Chu Tian raised a condition, you have to return my employee Vivian to me first, otherwise I will not leave. Vivian was the company's only spatial engineer and now was the time to use the space warehouse. Just one space warehouse was not enough, and if Vivian was held captive by the elves for a year, Miracle Commerce's development would be slowed down. This was something Chu Tian could not tolerate. Ulysses discussed it with the elders. Looking at the current situation, forcefully taking Vivian away would not be good for the elves. It would be better to have Vivian stay by Chu Tian's side and continue learning spatial technology. This way, it would prevent a troublesome fellow like Chu Tian from finding an excuse to cause trouble, and it would allow the elves to introduce the most advanced spatial technology on the continent, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Although it was against the rules and the council could not avoid a war of words, the pros and cons were very clear, so everyone would understand. Ulysses could only nod, all right. Then we'll have Vivian stay in Oldman's small town to be interrogated. Chu Tian heaved a long sigh of relief. He had finally escaped from the elves' hands. Actually, the elves were one of the easiest races to deal with on the continent. If the other side was a spirit beast, they wouldn't have wasted so much time talking. They wouldn't have captured him back to their tribe and would have killed Chu Tian in the small town. Then they would have flattened the small town and taken everything from it. How could Chu Tian have survived until now? However, the elves were once the most powerful race on the continent, and they were now one of the most powerful races on the continent. This race still had its merits. At the very least, cooperating with the elves wouldn't be like cooperating with humans. Brother Chu Tian. When Vivian was brought out, she immediately shouted out in excitement. She charged over and gave Chu Tian a large hug. She had heard that the elves wanted to make peace with Chu Tian and even agreed to let Vivian return to Oldman's small town. This matter made Vivian very excited. She was most worried that Chu Tian would have an irreconcilable conflict with his clansmen. Vivian would be placed in a difficult position if she stood on the other side. If the elves were willing to accept Chu Tian and even cooperate with Chu Tian, whether it was for the elves or for Chu Tian, it would be a very good thing. This was because compared to the other superpowers in the Forest of Chaos, the elves were the friendliest and most reliable. Are we going back? Vivian said, I don't want to stay here for another second. No rush. Chu Tian said to Vivian, we'll first build a space warehouse here. This will make it easier for us to transport the Lost Forest's resources. The Tree of Life tribe's elves knew that Chu Tian wanted to build a space warehouse here and they were all filled with excitement, especially the elven children. Chu Tian's skills and actions had already spread throughout the tribe, so the elves all knew what kind of thing the space warehouse was. If the Tree of Life tribe could build a space warehouse, wouldn't the magical products of Miracle Commerce be sent to the Tree of Life tribe in minutes? Magnetic sound machines, video players, delicious canned food, and many other fun things. The elves could not leave the tribe because of the rules, but they could still enjoy many entertainment activities. To the Tree of Life tribe's elves, this was a very good thing. There was only one space warehouse that Miracle Commerce was using. This space warehouse was inside Miracle Commerce, so naturally it could not be open to the public. However, before Vivian was brought back by the elves, she had already prepared to build a second space warehouse. This space was around the same size as the first space warehouse. Although the shape had not been changed and it was just like an irregular pancake, it had already been marked. Vivian immediately began to arrange the space warehouse's summoning array. She also reserved a few backup energy pillars so that the space warehouse could be opened. As for the transformation of the warehouse's shape, Vivian could return to the small town and slowly complete it in the laboratory. 3 days later, the space warehouse was officially completed. This space warehouse would be a special channel for Miracle Commerce to transport goods to the Lost Forest. Although it was made for Miracle Commerce, if the elves, flower fairies, and tree ants needed it, Chu Tian did not recommend helping them transport things over. The elves began to cheer. With the source energy array in the tribe, the elves could enjoy the convenience of the space warehouse. Therefore, a large group of children surrounded Princess Vivian, asking her to bring back some gifts when she went out. You can all be assured, I won't forget everyone. Vivian waved her hand in high spirits, I will definitely bring back a lot of fun things for everyone. With the little princess promise, the elves were assured and left. At this time, the first batch of lost crystals was sent over and bags were thrown into the space warehouse. Then the various precious gifts the flower fairies had given to Chu Tian were placed inside. Everything was done. They could set off. With Vivian's spatial ability, she could reach Oldman's small town in around an hour without bringing any objects or people. However, other than Chu Tian, there were still several dozen flower fairies coming with her. Vivian could not bring all these people with her spatial ability, so she asked the elves for several flying mounts. She flew them in the direction of Oldman's small town. Goodbye everyone. I will definitely bring back a lot of fun things for you all. Vivian smiled as she waved her hand at the elves. The elven elders all had strange expressions on their faces. Princess Vivian had seriously violated the tribe's rules and that human had violated a great taboo of the elves. In the end, not only did they not receive any punishment, they were even allowed to return. What kind of matter was this? If this matter was spread in the forest, it would have a bad influence on the elves. Perhaps there would be more rebellious or curious elves sneaking out in the future, causing the elves to fall into chaos. Ulysses had no way to deal with this. Now he had to think of how to deal with those old fellows in the council. When Vivian left the elven tribe, she felt her body relax. It was like several shackles on her body had been broken and she felt an unprecedented freedom. This feeling was too great. Vivian never thought that she would be able to solve all the problems this easily. The elves did not dare look down on Chu Tian anymore. The Treants gave Chu Tian heavy responsibilities and the flower fairies and elves became friends. Now Miracle Commerce had a large chance of working with the elves, which was the situation Vivian wanted to see the most. If the elves could absorb Chu Tian's wisdom, they would become even stronger. After a day and a night, everyone arrived at the valley where Oldman's small town was located. In these 10 days, Oldman's small town did not seem to be in chaos, rather it was still very orderly. After all, there were over 1,000 elven elites stationed in Oldman's small town. These elves were not strong, so how could normal locals dare provoke them? The elven army was arranged by the elders to maintain peace in Oldman's small town. They had stayed here for many days, so it was inevitable that they would enter the town to buy supplies. When the elves entered the town to take a look, they were immediately attracted by the strangeness of the small town. After a few days, the elves all had a magnetic sound machine and they used it to listen to the human radio every day. Other than that, Oldman's small town's movies began to play, which attracted the elves' interest. They gradually moved from the valley to the small town, finally living in the small town. These over 1,000 elves were members of the Tree of Life tribe and most of them were around 200 years old. They had never left the tribe before, so how could they resist the temptation of Miracle Commerce? The music and stories on the human radio, the wonderful plots of the movies, and the delicious source energy food, all of this deeply attracted them. This made the elves who had closed themselves off for 100 years feel for the first time that the world was this wonderful. Their clansmen living in a small place for generations was truly too boring. These elves even had a thought in their minds. It would be great if they could guard this place forever. At this time, Princess Vivian came back. Vivian took out a token from the tribe's great elder and announced that from today onwards, the over 1,000 elven soldiers would be responsible for protecting Princess Vivian. In other words, from today onwards, this elven army would be managed by Princess Vivian. The elves were all very shocked, not knowing what had happened. Princess Vivian had been brought back to the tribe and not only did she not come back, she even sent this army over. What was going on? But no matter what, being able to live in Oldman's small town was a very happy matter. Chapter 389. The high-level members of Miracle Commerce were all present and the one leading them was an otherworldly white-clothed woman. She had a full figure and was dignified and beautiful, just like an otherworldly goddess. If it wasn't Miracle Commerce's vice-chairman Meng Qinggu, who else could it be? When she learned that Chu Tian and Vivian had been taken away by the elves, she immediately led the 3,000 trained barbarian berserkers to Oldman Canyon. At that time, the small town was on the verge of being shaken. This newly formed alliance was not firm and it almost fell apart. It was all thanks to the young miss rushing over to stabilize the situation. Meng Qingwu's ability to manage the situation could not be doubted. Now that he returned to the small town, Chu Tian was surprised to find that the small town did not decline. Rather it was a bit more prosperous than before. After Meng Qingwu came to Oldman's small town to appease everyone, she immediately revised the small town's system and perfected the small town's laws, making the small town even more orderly. Meng Yingying punched Chu Tian's chest. "Why did you take so long to come back? I thought you were locked up by the elves and I was prepared to bring people to the elven tribe to save you. There's no way around it. I'm this handsome, but when I went to the elves, countless young elven girls begged to marry me. I had to spend a great deal of effort to keep my integrity and escape." Chu Tian's face was as thick as a wall. "Look, even the little flower fairies can't resist my beauty. Didn't they follow me here? Damn narcissist. Truly shameless." Meng Yingying fiercely said, "If I was an elf, I would first hang you up and beat you up. Let's see if your mouth is still this smooth." Wah! This ruthless. It seems like this little girl hadn't been taught in a long time. Meng Qingwu's expression did not change, but it could be seen that she was no less worried than her little sister these past few days. What happened in these past few days? Why did the elves let you all come back? Did they not make things difficult for you? The elves did not do anything to me and instead let me take advantage of them. The two sisters were very clear on what kind of person Chu Tian was. It wasn't strange for something like this to happen to him. But after asking about the details, they were still shocked by Chu Tian's luck. Especially the matter of forming an alliance with the flower fairies and the spiritual technology he was preparing to develop, it all shocked the two sisters. Although they did not understand the flower fairies, when they saw the flower fairy sisters, these little cute creatures immediately captivated them. Welcome to the small town. Meng Yingying walked in front of the flower fairies. Why do you all look so tired? The spiritual energy here was very thin. The flower fairies were immortal beings, but that did not mean their bodies were good. In fact, the flower fairies were very sensitive to the environment, so when they went from a place with dense spiritual energy to a place with thin spiritual energy, they would immediately fall into weakness. However, Chu Tian had already thought of a solution. Chu Tian set up a spiritual energy gathering array and then transplanted the precious herbs the flower fairies brought, creating a new garden for the flower fairies. The flower fairies could recover their vitality and live normally in the small town. After settling down the flower fairies, Chu Tian held a high-level meeting. He first checked everyone's body condition and cultivation base. Chu Tian's cultivation was at the forefront, already in the 9th awakened soul layer. He could easily defeat a peak 9th awakened soul layer marquee expert, and he had a 50% chance of defeating a first true spirit layer expert. The others weren't slow either. Nangong Yun's cultivation was the fastest, reaching the 8th awakened soul layer. Next was the Meng Qingwu sisters, who had just broken through to the 7th awakened soul layer. Chen Bingyu and Dongfang Haoren were still at the peak 9th awakened soul layer, but they were waiting for an opportunity to charge into the true spirit realm. Chu Tian was a bit pleased. Everyone's cultivation speed wasn't bad. But in a place like the Forest of Chaos, this bit of strength was still lacking and couldn't be used. After all, the Forest of Chaos couldn't compare to Southern Xia. There were many true spirit realm experts here, and there were many true spirit realm experts that were unknown in the forest, appearing out of nowhere. Miracle Commerce couldn't do without several true spirit realm experts. They couldn't count on Vivian alone, right? Vivian was suitable for beheading the leader, but she couldn't do a large-scale battle. After all, spatial attacks consumed too much spirit energy. So, Chu Tian set a goal. He would first use the rich resources of Miracle Commerce to increase everyone's strength. Miracle Commerce's overall strength would increase their foundation in the forest. This was not a hard matter. How rich was Miracle Commerce? When they were in Southern Xia, they had already prepared enough resources to cultivate several true spirit realm cultivators. Now that they had managed the small town in the Forest of Chaos for over a month, they had collected thousands of level 2 sacred herbs. Even the Southern Summer Kingdom's treasury couldn't compare to this. Even more. Chu Tian had obtained quite a bit of fairy wine, which was all prepared for everyone to attack the true spirit realm bottleneck. With the flower fairies assisting them, it would be half the effort, so why would they need to worry about breaking through? Chu Tian did what he said, immediately increasing everyone's strength. In just a few days, the young Miss, Yingying, Yun Yao, and Feng Kaidai had all broken through 2 levels, reaching the 8th awakened soul layer. Nangong Yun had reached the peak 8th awakened soul layer and was attacking the 9th awakened soul layer. Chen Bingyu and Dongfang Haoren were important targets. Chu Tian had not only refined several top-grade sacred pills for them, he had also prepared a cup of fairy wine and a flower fairy to assist them in their cultivation, helping them break through their bottlenecks. Now that the two of them were in closed-door cultivation, Chu Tian had an 80% chance of success. Everyone's strength was quickly increasing. With this speed, In just a month or two, these high-level members would all be true spirit realm experts. At that time, Miracle Commerce would be able to enter the true 100-race battlefield in the Forest of Chaos. When Chu Tian finished his work and was prepared to relax, Meng Qinggu suddenly found him. "I have something to give you, perhaps it will be of some help to you." The young miss wanted to give something to me. This was truly a rare matter. The young miss took out a sheathed long blade and presented it to Chu Tian with both hands. Chu Tian was stunned for a bit. He could feel the powerful energy contained in this weapon. This blade is the weapon of the Warhound's Kingdom's true spirit cultivator. This nether flame blade is the Warhound's Kingdom's Malim's weapon. From the information gathered from all sides, it is a genuine soul-contracting weapon, and it is the Hell Song tribe's inherited treasure blade. Originally, I wanted to find a suitable person to use such a prized artifact. However, I haven't been able to find one. A while ago, I sent this saber to the laboratory for research. I discovered that this saber seems to contain a very extraordinary flame energy. I think it might be helpful to your cultivation technique. Is that so? Let me see. Chu Tian took the nether flame blade and pulled out the netherworld sword. The two weapons lightly touched, and although he did not use any spirit energy, the place where the blade and sword touched immediately exploded with a roar. The power of the two weapons automatically surged out, like two pieces of iron sucking each other, or like two archenemies with a blood feud that could not wait to devour each other. As expected, the nether flame blade was very similar to the netherworld sword. The nether flame blade was also made from an innate spirit flame. If you didn't guess wrong, it should be the dark spirit flame. The dark spirit flame and the netherworld flame were similar, but the dark spirit flame was an innate spirit flame born from a dark environment, and the netherworld flame was an innate spirit flame born from death energy. Although there were some differences, they were the same type, so it was the law of the jungle. From the clash of the blade and sword, Chu Tian could roughly guess that the nether flame blade and the netherworld sword were similar in strength. If one of them could swallow the other, it would be a leap in quality. Very good. The young miss gift really came at the right time. Chu Tian quickly gave his thanks. Without saying another word, he immediately went into closed-door cultivation. Chu Tian's cultivation technique had reached a bottleneck and he hadn't made any progress in a long time. It was hard to find suitable materials to cultivate the netherworld flame sword in its large success state. Chu Tian never would have thought that there would be something by his side that could help him increase his cultivation. Chu Tian found a quiet cave in the valley to go into closed-door cultivation. With a blade and sword in hand, he immediately began to cultivate. The blade and sword were both very strong weapons, but who would swallow who in the end? Chu Tian didn't even think about it and immediately urged the two weapons to collide. The blue and white flames and the purple and black flames instantly soared up and intertwined with each other. Every second, they fiercely collided dozens of times. The surrounding mountain rocks were shattered and a large number of rocks rolled down, as if there was an earthquake. Such a strong ability. If he hadn't reached the 9th awakened soul layer, Chu Tian wouldn't have been able to control it. The two strange flames were evenly matched, but the longer they fought, the more the abyss netherworld flame gained the upper hand. If it was a normal netherworld flame, the dark spirit flame would not be afraid. They were of the same grade and it was unknown who would win. Chu Tian's netherworld flame was not simple. This netherworld flame had not only been nurtured in the Spirit King's body for 1,000 years, it had also absorbed the Hellfire Demon's green abyss flame, so it had an abyss attribute. The spirit flame could even turn into a human form, so whether it was spirituality or essence, it surpassed the dark spirit flame by far. Finally, the nether flame blade's flames couldn't hold on any longer and was absorbed by the netherworld sword. Finally, with a dang sound, it snapped in half. Chu Tian threw away the two pieces of the nether flame blade and saw the purple, black, blue and white flames intertwining on the netherworld sword. After the netherworld sword swallowed the nether flame blade's energy, the weapon's spirit's strength continued to increase. Finally it reached a point, but it didn't stop and continued to charge forward. Hong! The mountain began to tremble again. Suddenly a treasure light soared into the sky. Chu Tian could feel that the weapon's spirit netherworld strength had already reached the true spirit level. This meant that the netherworld sword's quality had increased. It was originally a level 2 soul contracting weapon, but now it had become a level 3 soul contracting weapon. It was now a high-grade level 3 soul contracting weapon. Equipment could be upgraded. This was something that no craftsman had ever heard of. But the netherworld sword was a high-grade level 3 soul contracting weapon, but it had been in the 10,000 corpse ancient tomb for too long, so it had weakened. It was just recovering its strength now. Not to mention that the netherworld flame had been nurtured in the Spirit King's body for 1,000 years and had swallowed the Abyss Demon's green abyss flame. Then it had swallowed the Nether Flame Blade's 1,000-year dark spirit flame, so its potential was far greater than before. Perhaps it still had a lot of room to grow. When the netherworld sword refined the dark spirit flame's energy, it instantly refined the spiritual energy into Chu Tian's body. This allowed Chu Tian's strength to quickly go from the 9th awakened soul layer to the peak 9th awakened soul layer. This was not the most important thing. The most important thing was that the netherworld flame sword had reached the large success realm and he had finally reached the highest realm. This sword art had reached the large perfection realm and Chu Tian had reached the peak. Chapter 390. A sharp sword wind was released. Like cutting through tofu, it instantly created a giant sword mark in the canyon. The trees, grass, and rocks that were struck by the sword chi were immediately crushed into powder. A raging flame erupted from the sword chi, instantly enveloping a large area. Under the cover of the flame, there was no heat at all. The rocks and plants continued to wither and shatter, finally turning into dust that filled the sky. Chu Tian revealed a look of pleasant surprise when he saw this. It had to be known that his netherworld sword had not moved at all when it was inserted into the ground. This was purely released by relying on his sword source spirit, releasing a strong sword chi with his bare hands, but it actually had this kind of strength. Was this the effect of cultivating the sword art to the perfection realm? Not mentioning the sword chi being doubled in strength, he who did not have a fire-attributed source spirit could actually fuse with the abyssal netherworld flame. In a sense, the abyssal netherworld flame had seeped into Chu Tian's sword source spirit, connecting with his source spirit. Like this, he was not as dependent on his weapon as before. Even if he was bare-handed, he could still use the netherworld flame sword, only the netherworld sword had a stronger effect. Not bad. This ancient sword art had been continuously modified and it seemed like it was becoming more and more complete. With his cultivation in the peak 9th awakened soul layer, he really didn't know how strong he had become. He really couldn't wait to find an opponent to compete with. Chu Tian shook his head as he sheathed his sword and jumped into the canyon. Oldman Small Town's young miss was attending the Dwarven Elders meeting. There were the Dwarven Elders, Miracle Commerce's people, and several elves in this meeting. Chu Tian had come back at the right time because the small town had just made an important decision. We've gone through an audit and the elves have met the requirements. The Dwarven Elders chief stood up and announced, we will now allow the elves to enter the small town. Yay! The elves led by Vivian all cheered. The Vice Mayor Meng Qinggu said, the elves will officially enter Oldman Small Town. According to the battle strength of the 1,000 elves, the elves will own 15% of Oldman Small Town's property and dividends. The elven army will be unified and will not mix with other armies. Vivian will lead them to maintain the small town's internal order. The elves were very satisfied with this decision. Now that Oldman Small Town had a complete system, any power in the forest could apply to join Oldman Small Town, but they couldn't join just by applying. They needed to be examined by the Dwarf Elder Council before the members of the small town voted on whether they could join or not. Because Miracle Commerce owned more than 50% of the town, as long as the Dwarven Elder Group agreed to join, Miracle Commerce had one vote of approval or one vote of veto. This double scrutiny could eliminate the possibility that the applicant had bad intentions and avoid affecting the balance of the town. The mayor had absolute authority over the garrison troops, and the factions that these garrison troops belonged to enjoyed the profits and dividends brought by the town. Now the small town had 6,000 berserkers from Miracle Commerce, which was the ruler of Oldman's small town. With this army suppressing them, the other powers did not dare act recklessly. When the Elven army joined in, 20% of the ownership was instantly divided, and Miracle Commerce fell back to 50% to 60%. This could only mean that the Elven army's battle strength was very strong, perhaps even above the berserkers from Miracle Commerce. The elves all had their own mounts. The elves themselves were very outstanding, and the unicorns were also demon beasts. The strength of these 1,000 Elven army was equivalent to 2,000 berserkers. These Elven army was led by Vivian and was also controlled by Miracle Commerce. This greatly consolidated Miracle Commerce's strength in Oldman's small town, and the other partners' control over the small town became lower and lower. They did not have any complaints about this. This was because they entered Oldman's small town mainly to trade with Oldman's small town. They did not really want to control the small town. Secondly, the elves were a large race in the Forest of Chaos, so how could the surrounding tribes dare provoke them? With the elves joining in, the small town would be safer. Ruling or attacking the small town did not have any meaning. Being friendly and having mutual benefits in the long term was the way of the king. But although it was like this, in order to fight for more benefits and avoid being gradually marginalized, the large tribes all expressed that they would invest more troops. After all, Oldman's small town was responsible for supporting the Allied army. If they sent out some of their troops, it would save them quite a bit of effort. The elves also played a crucial role in increasing the popularity of the small town. This was because among the many locals in the forest, the elves had the best reputation. The weak tribes and some hesitant locals all believed that Oldman's small town was safe, so they all chose to settle down or do business in the small town. How could their popularity not increase with each passing day? Meng Qinggu did some statistics. According to Oldman's small town's current development, the population would double or triple in 3 months. It would take around a year for a small city to be formed, and it would become a special trade center for the army in the forest. Oldman's small town had this much potential, so Miracle Commerce naturally increased their investment. Miracle Commerce, Miracle Medicine Shop, Miracle Talisman Shop, movie theaters, and hotels were all being built in the small town. Miracle Commerce's goods were cheap and had a sufficient supply. Now they had established a good reputation among the locals. Once this good reputation was established, it would spread very quickly. People would come to Oldman's small town to sell their good materials, and they would come to Oldman's small town to buy whatever they needed. Miracle Commerce became the best choice. Chu Tian, Meng Yingying, and Vivian, these were the first people to come to Oldman's small town, and they were also the founders of Oldman's small town. When they saw the small town becoming more prosperous day by day, their hearts were filled with a sense of accomplishment. A prosperous scene that could only be seen in a large forest city actually appeared on the outskirts of the Forest of Chaos in a small underground town. Moreover, it was developed in a short period of time. This could be considered a miracle in the Forest of Chaos, and it was something worth being proud of. Chu Tian. Meng Yingying quickly ran over. Our back garden is already done, quickly come and take a look. Yingying grabbed Chu Tian and brought him to a hidden valley. This little valley was the small town's back garden. Chu Tian personally chose a completely sealed environment. There were no roads to enter, but there was a secret passage that led directly to the small town. This place was not big, and it was filled with tall trees. It was impossible to see the valley from the sky. Chu Tian placed a spirit gathering array to gather spiritual energy in the valley. He also planted large amounts of rare plants in the valley, especially various sacred herbs, as well as several half-immortal great herbs. Finally, he placed a concealing array and an illusion array as protection, creating a temporary living area for the flower fairies. Compared to the bustling Oldman's small town, the small valley was like a different world. It was quiet and serene, with hundreds of flowers in bloom, and the air was clear. Chu Tian held Meng Yingying's soft little hand, and the two of them walked into the soft grass. There were flowers in full bloom all around them, just like they were in a paradise isolated from the rest of the world. Lulu, how are you? The flower fairies were playing with the flowers and herbs. There were several video players and radios installed here, so the flower fairies could watch movies and listen to various music and story programs. Lulu saw that Chu Tian had come and immediately flew into the air with joy. "We're very good, thank you for making a new home for the flower fairies." This wasn't all for the flower fairies. Miracle Commerce had bought all these fresh sacred herbs, and if they were all stored, the medicinal properties would be lost. Now that the herbs were planted again, they could provide a new living environment for the flower fairies, and the flower fairies could take care of the growth of these herbs. It had to be known that sacred herbs had a very harsh living environment. The survival rate of humans transplanting sacred herbs was very low, and only the flower fairies were natural gardeners that could ensure the survival and freshness of each sacred herb, ensuring that Miracle Commerce's resources wouldn't be wasted. Meng Yingying really liked this fragrant little valley with hundreds of flowers in bloom. She took a deep breath. "It really is too beautiful." Was there a need to say it? "This is my masterpiece." Chu Tian pretended to be humble as he said, "What does this count for? If you go to the flower fairy's garden, you'll know what is called beauty." Meng Yingying was filled with yearning. "Is that so?" "Of course, the flower fairy's garden is the most beautiful place in the world. I welcome Yingying to visit the garden when she has time." Lulu warmly invited Yingying and at the same time said with an emotional sigh, "We have never left the flower fairy's garden before, and we finally know how important the garden is to the flower fairies on this trip. If there was no forest and no garden, the flower fairies would not be able to survive." "That's right. If we leave the forest, our bodies will dry up. We have to properly protect the forest." Why hasn't Chu Tian's spiritual space project started yet? These flower fairies had experienced a long journey and they suddenly felt a lot of emotions. They already realized how important the environment was to the flower fairies, so before Chu Tian could say anything, they took the initiative to talk about the spiritual space project. This was exactly what they wanted. "Don't be anxious. As for the construction of the spiritual technology, we have to slowly start from zero. I will first teach the related technology to Yingying and the young miss." Chu Tian did not have time to teach the flower fairies one-on-one. After all, the flower fairies had a weak foundation and didn't know anything about source energy arrays, so he could only choose the two sisters with strong learning abilities. When the time comes, Yingying will be in charge of leading the flower fairies in the spiritual laboratory. Meng Yingying stuck out her tongue. She was almost becoming an all-round assistant. Because of Meng Yingying's mirror source spirit, she could switch attributes at any time. She could help Vivian establish the spatial laboratory, and she could also participate in the flower fairy's spiritual laboratory. Meng Qingwu's learning ability was stronger, but her source spirit did not have any attributes. Not only did it not have battle strength, it did not have any auxiliary abilities. It could only provide theoretical support and could not participate like her little sister. Meng Yingying thought in her heart. Am I considered half a student of Chu Tian now? After all, with regards to Chu Tian's knowledge, Meng Yingying was the one who had the most comprehensive knowledge. This was not only because of Meng Yingying's special innate talent, but also because Meng Yingying was Chu Tian's most trusted person. Meng Yingying thought of this and her mood instantly became very happy. If she could help Chu Tian complete his work, she would be able to realize her own value. As for the establishment of the spiritual laboratory, they decided on it first. Meng Yingying was prepared to play around with Chu Tian in the valley, when she suddenly heard the communication device in Chu Tian's chest ring. What is this? You actually dare disturb father's date? Chu Tian was a bit depressed as he picked up the communication device and picked it up. Nangong Yun's hurried voice came from inside. Boss, this is bad, someone has come to cause trouble. 2 patrol teams have been attacked and have suffered heavy casualties, quickly come and take a look. Chu Tian's expression changed hearing this. This time it was not according to the script, so he was afraid that he had encountered trouble. This was not strange. Oldman's small town had developed this quickly, it was impossible for everything to be smooth sailing. After all, this was the forest of chaos, but he never thought that trouble would come this quickly. Let's go. Meng Yingying was very regretful. She had managed to pull Chu Tian out to play with great difficulty, but in the end she had been called back before they even started. Chapter 391. There were close to 100 patrols in the small town. There were 30 barbarian berserkers, 30 orc archers, 20 bear people, 5-6 wolf people scouts, and several ogres. The barbarian berserkers were the main force and normal patrols did not carry source energy weapons because their main task was to disperse the forest bandits. With the barbarian berserkers' killing power, it was enough to deal with most of the bandits. The ogres and bear people were the main force, with the orc archers and wolf people supporting them. This kind of team arrangement was very scientific. They could advance and retreat, they could attack and defend, and they could chase and counter-chase, so how could they be completely wiped out? Each small team had several communication devices on them and they would report the situation to headquarters every half an hour. If something happened, they could immediately inform headquarters. Now 2 patrols had been attacked. They didn't even send out a distress signal. When headquarters found that the 2 small teams didn't report on time, they sent out wolf people to find them. In the end, they found that they had all been killed and there wasn't a single person alive. Chu Tian brought Yingying to the scene of the incident. There were corpses all over the ground and blood dyed the forest red. The scene was very tragic and each berserker had at least 10 arrows stuck in them. There were even some that had been turned into porcupines. No matter how strong their vitality was, it was impossible for them to survive this kind of fierce attack. This was too tragic. How could this kind of thing happen in front of their eyes? Meng Yingying's face was a bit white. Which bastard did this? Why would they kill our people without any grievances? We are currently investigating, but there are no traces of value. Nangong Yun led a group of soldiers to search the forest. Our patrols were suddenly ambushed and there wasn't a single corpse left. This is truly a strange matter. That's right. This was too strange. The patrols all have elite wolf people and their noses can smell the scent of people 10 miles away, so it is impossible for them to be ambushed. Meng Yingying was confused. Even if they were ambushed, our Oldman small town's patrols shouldn't be this weak. Did the other side have a true spirit expert? Not necessarily. Nangong Yun said, look at the direction of the arrows. These arrows were shot from the air. Although the werewolf's nose is very sensitive, if the enemy is an aerial cavalry, the werewolves will not be able to track them if they attack from the air. Air cavalry? This was precisely the weakness of miracle commerce. Meng Yingying did not seem to understand. Why didn't we receive the distress signal? Because there was no time to send it out. Nangong Yun pulled out an arrow and pointed at the black arrowhead. The arrow is coated with poison. Even if the bear men, werewolves, and orcs are very brave, they will immediately lose their ability to defend after being hit by this arrow. The berserkers and the strong ogres were able to resist the paralyzing poison, but there were too many of them. After a wave of attacks, not many of them could stand up, so they didn't have time to use their communication devices. Meng Yingying frowned slightly. How sinister, using poison. Normal patrols did not have storm rifles or source energy cannons. In a situation where they lacked firepower, they were suddenly ambushed by enemies in the air, so they were completely annihilated. They didn't have time to resist at all. But why did they attack Oldman's small town's team for no reason? Was this a coincidence or was it deliberate? Sir Mayor, this is bad. At this time, an orc ran over in a panic. That ugly face was covered in sweat. We have another team being ambushed. They have already used their communication devices to send a distress signal to the small town. The situation is not good. Everyone's expressions changed. Chu Tian quickly asked, the location. The orc quickly said, it's around 20 miles east of the canyon. The ones being ambushed this time are a guard team. The patrol team was not the same as the guard team. After Oldman's small town gradually developed, they began to expand their business. For example, the local merchants in the forest bought large amounts of materials from the small town. They were afraid that they would be robbed when they left Oldman's small town. After all, Oldman's small town was becoming more and more popular. The forest bandits knew that there was a large amount of profit to be made, so there were quite a few people waiting for them. It was because of this that Oldman's small town set up a large number of patrols to ensure the safety of the surrounding environment. However, the patrol's range was limited to the canyons. Some of the native forest merchants were still worried because the forest bandits could lie in ambush in the nearby forest and guard the entrances of the canyons. That way, they could still catch them. If there was demand, there would be business opportunities. Oldman's small town had a large number of troops, so most of them had nothing to do. When Meng Qinggu came to Oldman's small town, in order to maximize their resources, she immediately opened up the mercenary business here. She established a miracle commerce mercenary business department in the small town, mainly taking care of the escort team. If the merchants were not assured, they could hire an army, letting the elites of the allied army escort them out of this area. The fee was based on the number of troops hired, so it was still very affordable. So many local merchants would rather spend a bit more money than take the risk. This way they could increase their income and solve the merchants' worries, which was beneficial to Oldman's small town's long-term development. The one being ambushed this time was a guard team. When Chu Tian hurried over with his people, it was already too late. The battle on this side had just ended and they were almost completely wiped out. There were several heavily injured barbarians and ogres, but because they had strong vitality, they didn't die, so they were saved. So many arrows, so many arrows. The barbarian opened his eyes to look at everyone. His consciousness was already very fuzzy, so he could only say with difficulty, "There are bats, so many bats." Bats? Chu Tian couldn't ask anything, so he waved his hand, "Quickly send them back for treatment." "Boss, there's something." Nangong Yun shouted from the forest. She found some giant bats that had been shot by the source energy gun and there was more than one of them. They were all dead in the bushes. The guards were different from the patrols. The guards were equipped with light source energy weapons, so even if they faced the airborne cavalry, they still had the ability to resist. These giant bats that died in the forest must be the main culprit behind this attack. Meng Yingying carefully looked at the bats. These bats were very large and each one was fat and strong, with beast-like claws, but they were not intelligent creatures. There was a strong green-skinned monster not far from them. This creature looked a bit like an orc, also having green skin, but there were many natural stripes on it. It had large amounts of poison arrows on its back and its weapon was a long bow. Chu Tian knit his brows as he muttered, "Forest trolls." Forest trolls were a common forest race. Trolls had high talent in alchemy, so they were called forest alchemists. However, the forest trolls were greedy by nature, naturally liking to steal from others. If it wasn't for the guards being equipped with source energy weapons, they wouldn't have had any casualties. Chu Tian knit his brows as he said, "Now it can be explained. The trolls have tamed bat beasts. Although bat beasts are level 1 demon beasts, they are quite strong among level 1 demon beasts. They have strong explosive power in short to medium range and bat beasts can use ultrasonic waves to explore the forest, so they can lock onto troops from a distance. They can accurately and fiercely attack when they are defenseless. The trolls are good at alchemy, so if they use poison arrows to attack, they can effectively destroy our troops' battle strength." Meng Yingying was even more confused. Did the trolls have nothing better to do? Why would they do this kind of thing for no reason? When Chu Tian looked over the troll's corpse, he found a strange tattoo. This tattoo looked like a skull with a sword stuck in it. What symbol is this? Each troll had a similar tattoo. This made Chu Tian feel that it was a bit strange. Perhaps this would help him find the other side's identity, so he called a few orcs over to take a look. Perhaps these locals would recognize it. Who knew? When the orcs saw the tattoo, they began to tremble in fear. I know. An orc said with a face of fear, "This is the troll marauders. It's over, we've been targeted by the marauders, we're completely done for this time. The small town can't be saved this time." "Fuck, what nonsense are you saying?" Nangong rushed forward and slapped his face. "You're the fucking one that can't be saved. If you dare speak nonsense again, do you believe I won't beat you to death?" Nangong. Chu Tian stopped Nangong. He felt that this matter was not simple. What is the matter with the marauders? Nangong Yun's fierce appearance made the orc very afraid, so he could only honestly explain. The locals of the Forest of Chaos did not live in villages, tribes, or towns. There were many races that were nomadic races, and the troll race was a very famous nomadic race. The marauders were a very famous group among the troll race. They were like a swarm of locusts, leaving no grass alive wherever they went. The mark of the marauders was the skull tattoo, and there were large amounts of domesticated bat beasts. Because the bat beasts had a strong ultrasonic detection ability, the marauders could easily find the locals hiding in the dense forest. These marauders relied on this method of plundering to survive. The marauders were wild, even daring to steal from the large powers in the depths of the forest. This was because the trolls did not have a fixed place to live. Every time they were chased by a strong local, they would immediately scatter. Those strong local powers could not do anything to them. As long as the wind blew over, the marauders would gather again. In short, they were a very hard to deal with group of fellows, so no matter who was targeted by the marauders, they were destined to suffer a large misfortune. Now that they were attacking the small town's patrols and guards, they were just giving Oldman Small Town a bit of face. After all, Oldman Small Town was an underground city, so it was not easy for the troll race to invade. They could only use this method to put pressure on the small town and steal some resources. Meng Yingying was very dissatisfied with the trembling orc. "If they dare appear again, we'll kill them all." "What is there to be afraid of?" You don't know, the marauders are very large." The orc was still trembling. "Their movements are strange, there is no way to predict them and no one can locate them. Even large tribes are afraid of them, with our few people. It's not enough. I think that after the marauders finish their demonstration, they will quickly come and make their demands. We'll satisfy their needs, it's better than being destroyed." Nangong Yun was filled with rage and wanted to hit him. Chu Tian pulled her back. "Nangong, don't be impulsive. This is a special time, we have to pacify the situation. Oldman Small Town's wealth would attract greedy locusts." But Chu Tian never would have thought that they would attract such a troublesome opponent. The matter of the guards being attacked would spread throughout Oldman Small Town. Perhaps many locals living and doing business in Oldman Small Town would be afraid and even have thoughts of escaping. What was even worse was that the large tribes did not dare offend the marauders and might leave Oldman Small Town under the threat of the marauders. They might even compromise with the marauders. Then, this newly established small town would definitely become a huge mountain of vitality because of this. Chu Tian could not let this happen. This small town was just the first step of miracle commerce's development in the Forest of Chaos. If they couldn't even do the first step well, how could they carry out the rest of their plans? Chapter 392. The marauders continued to attack, causing the small town's casualties to rise to over 1,000 people. Just the Allied army alone had lost over 500 people. Paper could not cover fire. The news quickly spread through the small town like a plague, immediately causing the small town's people to panic. These infamous forest thugs were known to everyone, and there wasn't a single power in the outskirts that could go against them. They were bold and savage by nature. Not to mention a small town that had just been established, they would even rob a caravan from a forest city without hesitation. There was nothing these wild thugs didn't dare to do. These locusts that people hated were simply the enemies of the forest. However, the marauders were very mobile, immediately leaving after doing something, never staying in one place for a long time. The forest of chaos was very big, it was impossible to chase after them. Therefore most of the time, the victims were helpless. Because of the marauders' cruel reputation, there were some local powers that surrendered to the marauders in order to save their lives, taking the initiative to give the marauders what they wanted. Oldman's small town's prosperity had gathered a considerable amount of resources, so it was already noticed by the large local powers in the forest, but they never thought that the marauders would arrive first. The marauders kept attacking the small town's troops in the wild. This was undoubtedly a demonstration to the small town. This kind of small power did not need to attack at all. The marauders used their fierce reputation to make them collapse internally and surrender without a fight, saving quite a bit of effort. I propose to immediately close the small town. That's right, we can negotiate with the marauders. Don't they just want things? I'll give it to them. In the Oldman small town meeting, the various tribe chiefs were discussing. Almost everyone did not agree to fighting with the marauders because there was a large disparity in strength between the two sides. The marauders dared to plunder the forest. It was not something a small town with tens of thousands of soldiers could stop. Not to mention that the marauders were all aerial troops, so their mobility was just too high. Oldman's small town and the surrounding local powers all lacked aerial troops. Without an army that could stop the marauders, how could they deal with these fierce marauders? Moreover, the trolls were very good at alchemy, so they could poison the nearby water sources, grass, and etc. First they would seal off Oldman's small town and trap the allied forces inside. Everyone, calm down. Meng Qinggu stood up. There's still a chance. Actually, with Meng Qinggu's cautious nature, the safest method was to close the small town. Oldman was an underground town and the marauders' air cavalry were not suited to attack this kind of town. As for besieging, that was also impossible. With Miracle Commerce's space transportation technology, it was impossible for the town to be trapped to death. All the daily necessities could be transported directly from the outside world. How long could the aliens hold out? Don't forget, they were a notorious organization. They would never stay in one place for too long. As long as Miracle Commerce could hold out for a while, the marauders would naturally collapse. Although this method was safe, it was ultimately a last resort. Oldman's small town would suffer a large loss and it could cause the unstable alliance to disintegrate. The most important thing was that Meng Qinggu understood Chu Tian too well. Making Chu Tian hide like a turtle was harder than making the sun rise from the west. If Miracle Commerce wanted to stay in the forest, they couldn't avoid the marauders, so how could they hide? Everyone, there's no need to panic. Meng Qinggu calmly said to everyone, Miracle Commerce has advanced source energy weapons, so these forest robbers have no advantage in front of our powerful firepower. It's not like we don't have the power to resist. The representatives of the various tribes looked at each other in blank dismay. The only variable now was Miracle Commerce. As for how strong Miracle Commerce was, the tribes had no idea because Miracle Commerce had always been very mysterious. They had a strong berserker army, sharp source energy weapons, and many other unexplainable abilities. Perhaps Miracle Commerce really had a way to deal with the marauders. One of the locals stood up and said, even if Miracle Commerce has the ability to deal with the marauders, our tribes don't have this ability. If the marauders launch a revenge attack out of shame, wouldn't our nearby tribes suffer a calamity? That's right. Everyone in Oldman's small town had a share. Everyone can be assured. Miracle Commerce dares to do what they want. Meng Qinggu confidently promised the locals, Miracle Commerce will never take the initiative to attack others, but since others have come to our door, we will not retreat. We will declare war on the marauders. Declare war. The marauders were famous for being hard to deal with. The giants of the forest couldn't eliminate these locusts, so what right did Miracle Commerce have to declare war on them? No matter how mobile the marauders are, they still need a foothold. Miracle Commerce will use our advanced technology to locate the marauder's nest. At that time, we will gather everyone's strength and sweep out the marauders in one fell swoop. Only like this can we shake the forest. Otherwise, if this group of marauders leaves, another group will come. No one wants to see endless harassment. Miracle Commerce wanted to eliminate the marauders. The locals had strange expressions as they whispered to each other. Finally they decided to wait and see. First they would see what Miracle Commerce would do. It would be best if it was as she said, otherwise once something went wrong, the tribes would immediately withdraw to avoid being caught up in this disaster. Meng Qinggu first appeased the locals and then immediately went to a secret room in Oldman's small town. Inside, there were many huge mirrors. Each mirror was 2 to 3 feet tall. The surface of the mirror was very clear. A gentle woman and a few employees were standing in front of one of the big mirrors, discussing something. Kaidai, how is it on your side? Elder sister, look. This is the image taken by the surveillance airship. Feng Kaidai slightly moved her body and the image transferring mirror behind her began to display the images. These images were clearly taken from high up in the sky. The entire forest was a deep green color, but because it was too high up, the details couldn't be seen clearly. Look here. Meng Qinggu zoomed in and could clearly see a large group of giant bats moving at a fast speed, flying through the forest at a low altitude. They stopped and fought in several places before leaving in another direction. Meng Qinggu gave a cold snort. That's right, it was them. Feng Kaidai said with a face filled with admiration, it's all thanks to Elder Sister's surveillance airship, otherwise it would have been hard to find traces of them. But the range of surveillance is limited. We can determine the direction of the marauders, but we can't determine where they are. Meng Qinggu had stayed in southern state for a long time, preparing for Miracle Commerce every minute. There were all kinds of special airships that consumed a large amount of Meng Qinggu's energy. In the skies above the Forest of Chaos, there was a communication airship every few thousand miles. Meng Qinggu had also made surveillance airships and battle airships. These new generation miracle airships not only had high performance, they were also covered in a layer of hidden mirrors. They could simulate various colors and camouflage, making it hard to distinguish them from the ground. They could operate at a maximum altitude of 50,000 meters and most of the time they were parked at an altitude of 20 to 30,000 meters. The existence of these airships was a secret of the company and the people of Oldman's small town did not know about it. There were several airships above their heads waiting for orders. The image shown on the image transfer mirror was actually taken by the surveillance airship 20,000 meters in the air. Meng Qinggu ordered, contact the second Heaven's Eye and search the area. Find where the marauders are hiding and have the Heaven's Punishment prepare to attack. Meng Qinggu named the special airships of Miracle Commerce. The one used to set up the communication network was called the Heaven's Net, the one used to monitor the ground was called the Heaven's Eye, and the one used to attack was called the Heaven's Punishment. Miracle Commerce had 6 Heaven's Net airships, 2 Heaven's Eye airships, and 1 Heaven's Punishment airship. Now the Heaven's Eye and Heaven's Punishment were in Oldman's small town and could listen to orders at any time. Feng Kaidai immediately picked up the communication device. Hey, second Heaven's Eye, this is the Forest Command Center. The Vice Chairman has ordered to search the southwest. As soon as the order was given, more than 40,000 meters in the air, the Heaven's Eye 2 airship that had been on standby suddenly began to descend and move forward. The airship's cabin automatically opened, revealing countless video cameras that looked like eyes, scanning the entire forest on a large scale. At the same time, the image transfer mirrors in the small town's control room lit up. The entire forest appeared on the image transfer mirror and all the images were transmitted in real time. A voice came from the communication device tens of thousands of meters in the air. Second Heaven's Eye, begin the operation. Another communication device also released a sound. First Heaven's Punishment calling the command center. All the weapons have been loaded, please give your orders. Wait for orders. Yes. What a bunch of stupid natives. Feng Kaidai closed the communication device and her face was filled with excitement. They still don't know who they have provoked, right? We'll let them see today what is called the power of technology. On the other side, Chu Tian and Meng Yingying were collecting the troll poison arrows. The two of them scraped off the poison on the arrows and analyzed it. This was the troll race's secret poison, but how could this kind of child's play trick be hidden from Chu Tian? Chu Tian easily reverse-engineered the poison's composition and formula. He gave the antidote to Yingying, immediately sent it to the Southern Summer Laboratory and Alchemy Factory. Give them 3 days and we'll need 10,000 antidotes. Understood. Yingying immediately took the formula and sent the information. After this information was sent to Southern Xia's laboratory, Miracle Commerce's various large alchemy workshops began to work. Large amounts of medicine would be made in a short period of time before being transported to Oldman's small town. The reason why the troll race made people tremble in fear. One of the main reasons was that their alchemy skills were very high, especially in the area of refining poisons. If the soldiers took the antidote before fighting, the troll poison arrows would lose their effect. Without these poison arrows, could they fight the berserkers and the ogres? Without these poison arrows, could they block the wild fire of the source energy weapons? Keep dreaming. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.